All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Trimmed and Burning Bible study. We are in 2 Samuel, continuing along. Today we're going to be in chapter 16. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to chapter 16 a while. I'll do a very quick recap of what's been going on, just to always get our minds into what's been taking place with what we're reading about. Now, the stuff we're reading about today is a continuation of this whole situation. Really, David and Bathsheba we learned about started this whole mess in David's life. But this whole thing with Amnon and Tamar, remember Amnon violated Tamar in this evil situation. So Absalom, his brother, David's other son, killed him. And remember, Amnon was the crown prince, should have been the next king. And David was angry about him violating Tamar, but never did anything because it's the crown prince and he showed a little bit of favoritism. And David does that. Even the great king of Israel did a lot of sinful things by showing favoritism to his family. Absalom knew it, took it into his own hands, also sinful. Can't murder people like this, right? If you're Absalom, he had no authority to do that, but he did that, and then he had to flee to Geshur, where his grandfather was also king. So his dad was king, but his grandfather was king. He had a lot of royal blood in him. So he just went and hid in Geshur because he knew that they could have avenged him for what he did. Then we learned that Joab, probably worried about some political instability because of his position, didn't want there to break civil war. So he had to convince David because David kept Absalom exiled. And Joab had to figure out this way, how are we going to convince David? And I'm sure he thought, it doesn't say this, I'm sure he thought, well, it worked for Nathan when Nathan told him this parable and this story about the sheep. I'm going to get a wise woman from Tekoa because he'll know I'm doing it. He won't believe I'm telling him this story. So he gets a wise woman from Tekoa, comes and pitches this whole thing, this whole story about her son and one killing the other one and how she just won't have any other sons left. And it was all to convince David in his own situation to bring Absalom back. So he did bring Absalom back, but remember, it was only a partial restoration. And I talked about how partial restoration is no restoration at all. Meaning Absalom was allowed back in the kingdom, but at an arm's length. He was not allowed to come into the presence of the king. So he had to stay where he was at. And this went on for, I think, 2 years that he wasn't able to see him. And Absalom finally gets sick of it and says, he's trying to send for Joab. Joab won't come. Sends for him again, he won't come. Joab's the one that went and got him in the first place. But now Joab, his deed's done, so he kind of let it go. Absalom got so mad he set his field on fire, which will be detrimental later. Their relationship's basically ruined over this. It did get his attention, but again, things that get people's attention, it's not always the best to take these kinds of actions. But he did get Joab to come back, and he says, why am I here? Why don't you send me back to Geshur? Because I'm living the same life I am here back then. I can't see my father or anything like that. So it got settled where Absalom and David kind of made up then after that. He kissed his hand, he bowed to him, they did the whole thing, but really inside they were still bitter about everything. Then last week, in chapter 15, we found out how Absalom, now that he's allowed to be around the king, he would wake up early in the morning and get down to the city gate, because that was like their courthouse, where all the judging was going on. People were bringing their cases to be the disputes to get taken care of, and Absalom would get there before everybody else and say, hey, where are you from? I love you, I care about you guys, how can I help you? It's a shame that David doesn't have anybody here to help you. So he kind of convinces people, and it says he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. He convinced them that he cared, gave them simple answers, just like what I always say politicians can do. Like, oh, if I were in charge, it would be so much better. And they give you no plan. That's what Absalom's one of the earliest politicians, you could say, to pull that off and to get people to vote for Absalom over David, essentially, to be king, even though there is no voting in the kingdom. So we know that Absalom eventually took over. He went to Hebron. He convinced 200 innocent men to go with him. They didn't know what they were doing, but it made it look like he had a whole crew and was getting ready to take over. So Absalom was able to take over in Hebron, and David had to flee Jerusalem. He was being wise and said, hey, if we don't get out of here soon, it's going to be bad. Absalom's going to come. I don't want to have a war, and he'll wipe us out because Israel's kind of turned on me right now. So it's not good, and they left and fled Jerusalem. And then it ended, if you remember, where David arranged a secret communication network because he's still very wise. And he said, while I'm gone, I'm going to need some spies. So he sends the priest back with the Ark of the Covenant. Says, I don't need the Ark of the Covenant. That's God's presence. God's with me. If he wants me to go back and see the Ark of the Covenant, he will. He'll take me back there. You guys go back there. You guys are wise, and I'm going to have your sons, Ahimaaz, Jonathan, they're going to deliver me messages, right? And he sets up this communication network. And at the end, Hushai wanted to come with David, and he's like, you'd be a burden. And we think it's because he's an old man. Like, you'd be a burden, but there is a way you can help. You could kind of be my false, you could go be a spy and kind of, Ahithophel, who had switched, was one of David's counselors, went with Absalom. He said, well, you can maybe convince Absalom to not follow Ahithophel's wise counsel because he's very wise, and maybe you could do that. So Hushai agreed, and I actually love The last verse of chapter 15, and since you're in 16, you'll see it right there. I wanted to mention this last week. Verse 37, how it ends. I love how it ends. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. Remember, Absalom was in Hebron. And he was going back to Jerusalem to take it over. And Hushai just happens to get there just in time. These are what we call in the modern day, a lot of Europe people call synchronicities. God's been full of them forever. What are the odds that Hushai got in there just in amount of time? They didn't have clocks, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have data on who was where and what time they were arriving, right? They didn't have ETAs or anything like that. So you could see he moved Hushai to get there just in time to make it look like Hushai never left. Because if he would have found Hushai going in, where were you, Hushai? Who were you talking to? Why did you leave, right? So God was perfectly timing it. So Hushai got back after this conversation just in time for there to be no, worries about it. Because the whole time, Absalom, remember, he was in Hebron going up to Jerusalem. So the priest and everybody were able to get back in time for him not to know about any of that plan. And that's where we left off last week. Now we're going to jump into 2 Samuel 16, verse by verse. We're going to go ahead and jump in here and read this one. Verse 1. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys saddled, bearing 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who faint in the wilderness to drink." And the king said, "And where is your master's son?" Ziba said to the king, "Behold, he remains in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "Behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." And Ziba said, "I pay homage. Let me ever find favor in your sight, my lord the king." When King David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood." Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head." But the king said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, 'Curse David,' who then shall say, 'Why have you done so?'" And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today." So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him, and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him and flung dust. And the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. Now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" And Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" And Hushai said to Absalom, "No, for whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. And again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you." Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give your counsel. What shall we do?" Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel esteemed, both by David and by Absalom. And that's the end of the chapter there. So there's a lot that's taking place here. It can be confusing at first, but we're going to break some of this down. So first, I'll just break down the first 4 verses with David and Ziba here, and the fruit and the bread and the donkeys and all those things here. So first off, does anybody remember who Ziba was? Anybody remember Ziba? He showed up early in this chapter. Do you remember, Graham?
I do.
Yep.
But I always say the name wrong.
Oh, you might say it right. I just say it like that. There's all different pronunciations. Tomato, tomato. Ziba, Ziba.
Yeah. Ziba was supposed to help on
Mephibosheth. That's a tongue twister. Mephibosheth.
On his property.
Yes.
He and his sons were supposed to be servants.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So she's correct. It's chapter 9 that happened. So yeah, he was supposed to be the servant and the manager of the property. Why would he be the manager of the property? Remember, Mephibosheth's crippled, right? So how's he going to take care of this stuff? Plus, he's, the king's, he's part of his royal family. So yes, we read about Ziba in chapter 9. He was given, it was kind of a good deal for him because they get these great jobs and they get to share in all the stuff. So he had so many servants. I want to say it's 30 servants, 20 sons, big crew, big work crew, right? And they were the managers. A pretty honorable job given by King David. So we've seen Ziba before, right? And that's where we know he was supposed to be stewarding Mephibosheth's land. So it says here that Ziba shows up, so David knows him, and he shows up, and it says he came with a couple of donkeys, loaves of bread, raisins, summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And he brings these 2 donkeys are for the royal family. Remember, donkeys are usually a royal thing to ride on, so he's bringing them for the family. And then he brought all this food and stuff for David's people. Why would they need it? Well, they're out in the wilderness, right? They're not in Jerusalem. So this is like a nice, generous thing. On the surface, it looks like a really good, loyal act of kindness. Like, wow, Ziba's still honoring David as king. He's leaving. He's taking all this stuff, got all his servants, loaded it up with all this fruit and bread and wine. But deep down, we're going to learn that not every gift is an act of generosity. Some are manipulative, and we believe this one is manipulative. Why? Well, let's look down in verse 3. And the king said, "And where is your master's son?" So this is an important question because Mephibosheth's crippled. He can't just walk around on his own like, hey, where's Mephibosheth? You're supposed to be in charge of his land. Where's he at? Why didn't he come? And Ziba here accuses Mephibosheth of betraying David. He says, Mephibosheth's back there saying, today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father. He's basically saying, well, now that Absalom's kind of run you out, Mephibosheth thinks he's going to take the kingdom back. That's why he didn't come. And to me, it just doesn't add up. Now, maybe out of his mind he'd think that, but why would Absalom, who's angry and his dad was in charge, he ran him out, why would Absalom want to kill his father, chase his father out just to say, oh, Mephibosheth, you are of Saul's family. I know you're crippled, but how about I just hand the kingdom over to you, right? I don't even think Mephibosheth would have thought that. Who knows? But I don't think so. And we believe this was Ziba taking advantage of a crisis, right? And you could say Ziba's being greedy. Why is he greedy? Because he just couldn't be the manager. He wanted to be the master of that land. He wanted it all. He wanted everything Mephibosheth had. And he wanted to be in David's eyes. He wanted to be favorable in David's eyes. It's kind of similar to when Judas would pretend to care for the poor, and the whole time we knew he was stealing money, like, oh, why did you spend all that money on that perfume? You could have given it to the poor. Meanwhile, Judas was dipping out, right? Other things. So sometimes people are generous for their own gain, and I think that's what's happening here with Ziba. And I don't just say that. You'll find out when we get to chapter 19, David will talk to Mephibosheth, and it will kind of open your eyes as maybe what was going on here. But it says, then the king said to Ziba, behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. So David makes a hasty judgment, says, what? He's saying he's taking my kingdom, that's it. Everything he had, you're not only the manager, you own it. It's all yours, take it from Mephibosheth, you own it. Now when you go back, just take it all. Now, I think Ziba was an opportunist, as you'd call it, right? Why didn't Ziba do this, earlier? Well, it was a good excuse to say that Mephibosheth stayed back, but he could have left the land before and went up to David and said, hey, Mephibosheth's talking about taking the kingdom. He didn't do it. It was an opportunity. Why? David is stressed out to the max. His son's trying to kill him, and he's running, and here's Ziba bringing up, this Mephibosheth and what's going on. And it's kind of like, you ever be like, I can think it was Roscoe sometimes, I'm super stressed out, and I'm trying to do things, and I'm so busy, and Roscoe's like, can I get cookies? Like, yeah, just go grab cookies. And it's not dinner time yet, but I'm just like so focused, I'm just like, whatever. Just take whatever you need, just go ahead. I think it's one of these situations where David's so overwhelmed. He's like, what? And he's so already probably angry, right? Angry at Absalom for what he's done, that he's now just in that angry mode. And you got to be careful of this. When you get angry and stressed out, everything starts to become angry. And then somebody brings something up, and I'm angry about that, and I'm angry about that. So I'm sure David was furious with maybe even Mephibosheth here. And unfortunately, David did not heed his son wrote later in Proverbs 18:13, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. And that's what David here, he made a rash decision out of just probably stress. and he should have stopped and said, well, when I get back, I'll talk to Mephibosheth. That's not good, But he kind of just jumps to conclusions. So beware of flattery and manipulation. I think that's what's going on here. And also remember to be slow to judge without hearing both sides first, is what we notice here. All right, let's go down. So that's kind of what happened there with the Ziba situation. And it'll come back around in chapter 19, and we'll see more of it later. But now we're going to get to this interesting part of Shimei. This guy named Shimei cursing David. It says, when King David came to Bahurim, there came a man of the family of the house of Israel, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually. So he's from the house of Saul. He's from Saul's family, maybe not direct in a lineage of it, but he's still a part of it, and he's still upset with what has happened. He's holding a grudge against David from Saul's downfall, and he's falsely blaming David for it. So look what he does here. It says, he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David and all the people and the mighty men who were on his right hand and on his left. So this is hostile and a public act of disrespect. I mean, could you just imagine going out and as like the president or the mayor or the governor's there and we're throwing stones from hills at him and all of his workers and all of his people? It wouldn't end well, right? We would be arrested, thrown in cuffs, maybe hit a little bit with some nightsticks or something, I don't know. So it was a bad situation, a rebellious way to go about things, and it symbolized rebellion back then. That was a symbolized rebellion, that he was rejecting David and he was mad at him and his people, which is, again, Exodus 22:28. David was still king, so he broke this in Exodus 22, you shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. So Shimei is sinning right here, as we could have probably guessed. He's supposed to honor his rulers, and he's not doing that. In verse 7 and 8, it picks up more. It says, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. So he basically calls David a murderer. It's a serious accusation. He's actually right, remember? This whole situation probably is happening because he's a man murdered because he killed Uriah, right? So he's actually probably right, but he misconstrues it here because he starts, as we see, blame it on David. But you have to understand, like that's the irony in all this. If he would have said it about Uriah and Bathsheba, it probably would have stuck a little bit more. But because he's saying it was all about Saul and what he did to Saul, it's so interesting because David was the most generous maybe to Saul. He could have killed Saul twice, if you remember. He ran from Saul. He never tried to take the kingdom from him. He waited decades until God actually brought him the kingdom, right? And even when his son rebelled, Ishbosheth, he didn't even kill him. He didn't even try to kill him yet, right? It was this whole war, but he was mad when they chopped his head off unrightfully. And remember, David cried about Saul dying. So it's kind of backwards what he has here. But he says, the Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul. So he's wrongly assuming that God is punishing David because of taking the throne from Saul. In his mind, he might think this is true. Like, David wasn't of that bloodline. You can't just steal the kingdom, David. So he, in his mind, Shimei thinks David really is getting chased out by Absalom because of what he did to Saul. And this is a warning to us. Sometimes people will wrongly accuse you that you're suffering or going through something because of some sin they think you did, right? Whether you did or didn't do that. And that's why I always come back to around, I never blame when somebody, gets sick or has something bad happen, and you hear people like, well, they've been into a lot of sin. You never know what God's going to do. I don't try to judge that because it might be for sin. Like in this situation, David probably is getting chased out for his sin, but the wrong one. So don't pick and choose which sin. He didn't sin about Saul. And I'm sure Shimei went back and was like, hey, David's getting what he got from doing to my relative Saul. It's completely off base, right? But that's what's happening. And he says, the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. So Shimei also, he thinks, and I'm sure some other people did too, that Absalom was going to have a permanent reign, that David was chased out forever, and God had literally stripped the kingdom from him and given it to Absalom. But later we're going to see David's going to come back and take the throne. But at the time, they don't know that. Even David didn't know that. Remember, he said, well, if God lets me return, that's great. If not, it's my fault, right? God knows what's best. But he falsely accuses David, and he falsely assumes that David is out of the kingdom forever. Later, you'll find out in chapter 19, it is, that Shimei is going to beg for mercy later. So things will come back around. His sins will catch up to him. But there's a lot of false accusations and misjudgments happening there. So be careful not to falsely accuse people or misjudge while things are happening. Let God figure it out. And God will defend who he needs to defend and take care of that there. All right, so we're going to move on down then to verse 9 and 10. says, verse 9, why should this dead, this is Abishai. Remember Abishai is a brother of Joab. They're the sons of Zeruiah. Their brother Asahel got killed in that war, and they just love to go and cut people's heads off, stab them, and take care of them. If they're a problem, they get rid of them, right? They're very aggressive people. And he says, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head, right? So a dead dog, we heard Mephibosheth use that language before. Dogs, not like America, we love our dogs. Actually, I was studying, I was looking at my dog, and I'm like, oh, can't believe they hated dogs in ancient Israel. They did, though. So that was like a derogatory thing. I mean, I still wouldn't call people dogs, right? Because, yeah, sometimes it can get really bad. But then a dead dog was also a helpless, like worthless animal. So it's extra worthless. So he's saying, this Shimei, why are we going to let this guy throw stones at us? He's not even a ruler. He's nobody high. Let me just go chop his head off. Take care of this guy. I'm sick of hearing him, right? Because he's getting rocks thrown at him too. And he's sick of it. And it shows again, Abishai and Joab, the first thought, they're those kind of people, the first people that have a problem, let's fight. Let's go fight them. Let's go knock their blocks off. Let's go punch them. It's like, oh, settle down. We can have conversations, right? We can relax. But they are those kind of people. Proverbs warns us about this. Proverbs 29, verse 11. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. So we'll see the difference here. David at least understood that one, again, before it was written. Abishai wants immediate justice right now, and David's going to choose to restrain himself and use wisdom to let God sort it out. So wisdom to us, don't always go for immediate justice. It's really hard not to, especially when you know people are doing the wrong thing and the evil things. You want to get them back. You want to take care of it right away. Sometimes you got to let God play it out himself. Verse 10, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? Basically saying, this isn't your concern, Abishai. Why does it involve you? I'm the king. Don't worry about it, right? And he's also, basically, you sons of Zeruiah. That is a derogatory way he's using it right now. Basically, you violent men. You guys are violent. What do I have to do? You guys are always so violent. You guys are always wanting to kill people. I'm sick of you guys. I'm sure David was like fed up with Abishai. He's just fed up with everybody at this point, I'm sure, too. He's just like all in his head, too. So he's like, Abishai, just drop it. Let it go. If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? So David shows humility here. He says, hey, maybe God wants me to suffer. Because you know what? Shimei is wrong about the Saul thing, but I did some pretty bad stuff, which is why I'm in the situation I am here today. So if God put it in his mouth to come and curse me, well, we better let him do it. So instead of silencing Shimei, David submitted to God's sovereignty, right? Accepting that God may be allowing this, which he's probably right to an extent, right? And this is like what Job said, Job 2. Shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil, right? So this happens sometimes, especially when there was sin. And David knows he's not innocent either in all this. So he's wise enough to know that. Verse 11, we'll move on here. And it says, David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. So behold, my own son seeks my life. Basically, David's saying, listen, my own son is trying to kill me. This doesn't surprise me. Some random Benjaminite from Saul's family. This is the least of my worries, guys. I'm more worried about my son who's trying to run me out of my kingdom and kill me. Why wouldn't this guy also be mad at me, right? And it puts Shimei's actions into perspective, probably for the people. They were probably all worked up. All those other men that weren't Abishai were probably like, some were probably like, let's get him. And then David's like, listen, everybody's mad at me. We can't just, every time somebody gets mad and wants to kill me, we just cut their heads off, right? So David's bringing reason, right? It doesn't mean that God necessarily approved of Shimei's cursing, but rather David saw this as a test of humility and endurance. So whenever somebody's doing something against you that doesn't seem right, just say, well, I'll just endure it. I don't have to get in a fight with them. I'll just allow the Lord to handle it. I'll pray about it, right? And that's what he does here. And Proverbs 19:11, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is glory to overlook an offense. So David is practicing wisdom right here, right? Verse 12, it may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today. So again, instead of taking revenge, David places his trust in God's justice and says, hey, maybe if I just let this happen, God, because I will restrain this and don't fight back, God will bless me. So sometimes it might be a test. Maybe we'll just let God and we'll see. And if I react one way, it'll go one way. And if I allow this to happen, God will be with me. So he says, I'm just going to let God take care of it. And again, Romans says that, beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And Romans was written, over 1,000 years later, but wisdom of God's always been around, right? So it's written down in Romans. And David, again, is surrendering vengeance to God here, which is wise of him. So it says in verse 13, so David and his men went on the road while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went and threw stones at him and flung dust. So Shimei does not stop cursing. He keeps on going. So the whole way to Jordan, after he's like, just let him go. The whole time they're just like ducking. There's another rock hitting off their helmets. There's the whole time dust is in their eyes. They're wiping their eyes. It would have been an awful, awful journey to Jordan, right? Would have been awful. And also, I can't help but notice this along the hillside, right? Shimei wasn't stupid. He wasn't down on the road throwing rocks. He's kind of like the kids that you throw from afar and then you can run. He was ready to run, I think. At any moment he saw Abishai run with the sword, he was taking off. So he's not stupid. He's up on the hill throwing him down from a safe distance. So he thought it was safe. And I'm sure Abishai, we've seen what's happened before. Abishai could have probably chased him down and killed him. But I couldn't help but notice he's doing it from a safe distance here. And it says he cursed as he went and threw stones and flung dust. So he's escalating the hostilities. Shimei's almost picking a fight. Instead of stopping, he's flinging dust, he's shouting, he's screaming, he's cursing them, and it's just getting out of control. And these are, in the Middle East, this is deep acts of dishonor, right? Deep dishonor here. And David as a king would normally have people executed for this disrespect. If this happened in the kingdom, trust me, if before Absalom, somebody came and done this, David probably would have had their heads chopped off, right? Because they're actually breaking rules. You can't do this to your ruler. You can't talk like this to your king that God chose, God's anointed, right? So he really is asking for it. Like you can say, this guy's asking for it. But David is showing wise restraint here. And it says, and the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan. Can you imagine that? They're weary. I can imagine they would have been weary without this, right? It's a long journey. Luckily, Ziba brought some snacks, right? He brought some snacks for them. So they had some food, but it's a long journey, right? And not only that, like it kind of reminds me I love driving to Myrtle Beach, like a 10-hour drive. It's a long drive. So you can get weird when you get there. But could you imagine the whole time the kids, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Where's the snacks? When are we stopping? It makes the trip worse. You know what I'm talking about? You guys all know. Some respect. You might have been the kid. You might be the adult. I don't know. But things happen, right? Things happen when it doesn't make things better when you're already exhausted and these extra things. So, these people were weary, right? They have dust all over their faces. They got hit in the head with rocks. They might even be bleeding. Some might have concussions. They got hit with some good ones, right? And they've been walking and walking and walking, right? So, but I love what it says there. They were weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. So at the Jordan, it shows a little bit of rest. And the Jordan, often in biblical times, is a symbol of transition and rest from God's work here, right? We always say, we're going to cross the Jordan one day, right? Because that's what they did. They crossed the Jordan back in Joshua's time. When we say cross the Jordan, we mean go to heaven, right? Crossing to the other side, right? Jordan is a transitional time here. So now they're going to rest to get restored at the Jordan River. And that's why that's there to show there's a transitional spiritual renewal coming here. And I'm sure you could hear David in Psalm 23. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He's getting restored here. David's faith in God allows him to endure these hardships, knowing that refreshment will come, right? And that's what this shows us. You can feel weary what you're doing right now. If you're doing the right thing for God right now and you're weary and exhausted and it's just getting worse and worse, know that there is a point where you'll get to the Jordan River. And I'm not saying dying. I'm saying you'll get to the Jordan River in this situation where God will eventually make it. I can test this. It'll go away. You'll get peace. You'll be restored and you'll feel refreshed again. And you'll almost forget until you remember how rough it was on the road to where you got, right? So there are those moments of refreshment. So he endures this in the face of harassment here. They're weary, but he trusts in God, and God provides a moment of restoration right here, which shows God's renewal in difficult seasons in our own lives. If we trust in God, he'll bring us through our trials to a place of refreshing, right? And to the last section here, we have Absalom entering Jerusalem. So now it's kind of like in those movies where it cuts back to the scene. Remember when Hushai walked into Jerusalem just in time? We're cutting back to that scene now. Hushai just got in town, and Absalom's walking into Jerusalem, right? He just got in. It says, now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. So Absalom finally seizes the capital. Remember, he was in Hebron when he did this. Ironically, following the pattern of David. He starts in Hebron, gains his power there, and then goes to Jerusalem. So now he's in Jerusalem, and it says here, the men of Israel. So that suggests he's got a broad support base now. His approval rating's going up, right? He's going up. He's getting more. He rolls in with his crew, and immediately people are like, oh, okay, Absalom's the king now. I'm with him, right? So he's got the men of Israel and Ahithophel, which also helped. Not only does he have a bunch of men from Israel, he has the wisest counselor, right? Who does David have now? David doesn't have Ahithophel. So David's wisest counselor is now on Absalom's side. So it does seem to the average man who's looking and doesn't have a spiritual heart and to see that this is evil and wrong, says, well, Absalom's going to be the king now. He's got Ahithophel. God's given him the kingdom. We're following Absalom now. So it shows that Absalom is gaining power. And it shows also that Ahithophel's defection, the fact that he defected from David, was such a political betrayal that actually, it was at the highest level, that actually probably helped convince, like I said, others to go along with it. And it says here in verse 16, and when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, he said, long live the king, long live the king. So remember, Hushai was also one of David's closest advisors, and this time he's going to act as a double agent. He's a double agent. He's part of the communication network, right? He's supposed to throw off Ahithophel's counsel because Ahithophel is wise with God's counsel, and he doesn't want Absalom to have this wisdom. So that's the whole reason Hushai's there. And this is going to mark the beginning of God's providence against Absalom's rebellion. Here's where God starts to come in and start to turn things against Absalom. I love what he says there. Long live the king. Long live the king. This is a calculated phrase. I think Hushai means it. But who's the king? David. Absalom's not actually king. David's the king. Israel says he's the king, but David's the king. So Hushai, you could just see in his head, like, as he talks, we'll start to break it down. He's probably always talking about David, so he's not lying. Because he doesn't want to lie, but he's saying, long live the king, and he has to convince him. But, Absalom's going to take it full of pride, his ego, like, oh, he's long live the king, that's me. But really, I think it could actually refer to David. It's one of those things that could be double. It could refer to Absalom or David. And I think Hushai is intentionally being deceitful, but in a way to protect David and to help him here. So Absalom, he's questioning Hushai because he knows Hushai, like Ahithophel, was one of David's friends. And Ahithophel at least made a little bit of sense because remember, Ahithophel's was related to Bathsheba. That was his granddaughter. And he's a little fired up about what happened to Bathsheba. So he is a little bitter about what David's done. So he could see why Ahithophel joined him, but why would Hushai? Hushai's great friends with David, right? Says, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why'd you not go with your friend? So Absalom's a little suspicious at first. A little bit of wisdom here. As he knows, it was one of David's closest advisors. So, but his question is, how ironic is this? Like, who are you betraying here? And a lot of times it's funny because people like Absalom, who is a betrayer, he's betrayed his father, right? They often expect loyalty from others. Isn't that ironic? The ones who betray people, they want loyalty now. It's like, you're not even loyal, dude. Like, what's your problem, right? So Absalom now all of a sudden wants loyalty. We're not having defection. We're not having people betray people. I need full loyalty. So part of his own DNA is he's a betrayer. But we're going to see whatever Galatians says, whatever one sows, that will he also reap. And that's what we're going to see here. And God's sovereign plan, like I said, is at work, even as betrayal here. We're going to move on down here now to verse 18 and 19. And Hushai said to Absalom, no, for whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. And again, who should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. So another thing here, he mentions the Lord's will here. He says, what does he say? For whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, I will be with him and I will remain. Who did the Lord make king? Absalom? No. The Lord chose David. So whoever the Lord chose, I will remain. So again, Hushai's not technically lying here. He's undercover saying, I'm still with David. He's not lying, being manipulative, maybe lying by omission, you would say today, right? But this is all part of the Lord's plan. He says it there. And again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. You could also maybe say, just like I served your father, I'm going to serve you in the way I would serve David. So you can see these double entendres. You can see these double moves here. Absalom's going to take it again with his ego that, all right, he's turning to me. But Hushai deep down is a double meaning saying, I'm going to serve you as if I'm serving your father, right? I'm going to do it for David. I'm here for David. But he's not actually saying it. It's not for personal gain. Hushai's not deceiving for personal gain. He's doing it to protect David and to bring him back his kingdom and really to throw off Ahithophel's counsel, right? It says, and again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. And then we go down here to verse 20 through 23, finishes out the chapter here. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give your counsel. What shall we do?" So remember, Ahithophel, wisest counselor that David has. Ahithophel wants David's trusted advisor to chime in here. And he recognizes Ahithophel's wise and he has some tough decisions to make. So he asks him what to do, right? And Ahithophel, look what he says. "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house." Remember from the last chapter when David was leaving and he sent back the Ark of the Covenant. Remember he left 10 concubines back to take care of the palace so the palace didn't get destroyed? It was all divine design, unfortunately. That's who he's referring to, those 10 concubines who are taking care of that kingdom that David let them to remain to take care of things. This is who he's going after. And he says, "Go into your father's concubines whom he has left to keep the house." This is going to be an irreversible rebellion. So Ahithophel knows once Absalom does it, it's permanent. There's no reconciling. Why? Because taking a king's concubine was taking the throne, remember? That's why, that's why David had to get Michal from Saul. He had to get her back to show that he was taking Saul's house and his house and bringing it back. That's why those things happened. So when you slept with the king's concubines, you were taking his throne. And he knew that's what it was going to do. And it's sad because, Ahithophel was bitter and he wanted David to suffer, right, for what happened to Bathsheba. I could see that's where it came into, right? But the sad thing is they didn't think about these 10 women. Think about these 10 women, or they're doing their job. Now they have to be used and abused for political stuff. Still happens today in other ways, sadly. This is an awful way to go about this. But remember, flip back here. We have a little time because you're not too far. 2 Samuel 12. Go back to 2 Samuel 12 for a second. Hold your finger in 16. 2 Samuel 12 and go to verse 11 and 12. 2 Samuel 12, verses 11 and 12 here. It says, "Thus says the Lord." Remember Nathan saying this to David. "Behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house." That'd be Absalom. "And I'll take your wives, concubines too, before your eyes and give them to your neighbor. Well, you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel." This is the prophecy being fulfilled. Remember, God had Nathan say this back then in chapter 12. So God's not mocked. For what somebody sows, they will also reap. David's sin was private, but now the consequences will be public, right? And it says in verse 22 in chapter 16 here, "So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof." Where did David see Bathsheba from? The roof, right? The roof. And it was up top where you can see high. And I'm sure, do you ever look at a rooftop for, down here, and if you saw somebody standing on a roof, you could look up in a city and look, you can see in, one of these towns, you'd be able to see somebody up on the roof. That's what's going on. Anybody's going to be able to see this. He's going to do it publicly, probably on the very rooftop where David did this to Bathsheba. So it's the same place, and it's happening to David, and David's going to be humiliated in front of all Israel. And unfortunately, they'll always remember that. Even when David comes back, they'll always remember David's concubines being humiliated like that up there on the roof. And it says, verse 23, "Now in those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God." Ahithophel is known for his unmatched wisdom here. And you can even see this here. It sounds evil, but this word from Ahithophel, as evil as it sounds, Ahithophel's probably thinking from a sinful, saying like he doesn't care about the women, but at the same time, God's giving these words to fulfill this prophecy, right? Not that it was good, but God already told Nathan it was going to happen, so God's telling Ahithophel, so it's saying just because Ahithophel did this evil thing doesn't mean that God wasn't giving him the words to say, to do, because he was actually having him carry it out. And Ahithophel was wise, and he was one of the wisest ones there, which again is why Hushai needed to come to confuse him, because whatever Ahithophel said was probably going to work if God was truly with him, right? And that's how this chapter 16, ends. What a mess, right? Anybody have any questions or comments based on chapter 16 or anything we read there, or anything else that has to do with it? All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Be sure to read ahead. We'll be in chapter 17, Lord willing, next week. Keep on studying. Keep reading your Bibles. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning, and I'll see you next time. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Bible study, Trimmed and Burning. We are in 2 Samuel. This week, we're going to be in chapter 17, so you can start to turn to your Bibles there a while. In the meantime, of course, we'll just do a recap on the past few chapters to get your heads back in the game of where we're at and what's been going on. So remember in chapter 15, 2 chapters ago, this is where Absalom had finally been restored to David. he was allowed back around the king, and he started to conspire to take the throne. He would stay outside of the city gate, which was like their courthouse, tricking people into thinking he cared so much about them in order that they would pledge their allegiance to him, right? Absalom was a really great politician and convinced them that he was really looking out for their best interest. So, of course, David heard about this, and he fled from Jerusalem, got away because he said, Absalom, when he comes back, it's going to be a full-blown war. I don't want to go to war with my son. He could actually take us right now. We need to get out of here. So all the people fled. Remember, everybody was crying. He stops at the last house and does one look back. Probably so sad. Doesn't know if he'll ever go back to Jerusalem again. He's been on the run before. He's been on the run for a long time before, and he doesn't know what God's going to do. Although in the back of David's mind, I'm sure he remembers 2 Samuel chapter 7, that God promised he would always be on the throne. But as you know, even with God's promises, we can have doubts, and even David, I think, had some of those as well. But of course, David is still wise enough. He has God's wisdom that he was able to arrange a secret communication network where he had the two priests, Zadok and Abiathar, and their sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan. They're going to be a secret network there. He also sent Hushai, if you remember back. So he was going to go spy, and he got into Jerusalem just in time before Absalom got there. So David was still going to be aware of what was going on in Jerusalem while he was in exile, hiding from everything. Then last week was chapter 16. And remember David and Ziba here. Ziba shows up while they're in the wilderness. They're all tired and I'm sure hungry. I get hungry pretty easy. I'm sure they were hungry and thirsty. And Ziba shows up with all this food and donkeys and all these nice things. And David says, Ziba, what are you doing here? He says, hey, I just want to help you. I'm here to provide for you. And he says, where's Mephibosheth? And he says, oh, Mephibosheth is back. He's going to try to take the kingdom back, which sounded really foolish to us because he's a crippled guy. And Absalom's not just going to hand it over. I don't think Mephibosheth was even that foolish. But Ziba kind of uses this as manipulation. We talked about how he does nice things for David and acts like he cares more than Mephibosheth. And David, in his stress and everything, just says, you know what, Ziba, you can have everything Mephibosheth had. And we talked about how that was not wise of David. He should always take both accounts into play here. But I understand he's in the wilderness, and David's already worked up about what's going on with his son. So he just goes ahead and gives Ziba what he wants. And Ziba, we believe, manipulated David with that whole story there. Then, of course, we had Shimei, who was a Benjaminite in Saul's family, who was cursing David, said, you man of blood, God took your kingdom because you're a man of blood and what you did to Saul. Now remember, David probably did have this issue because of what he did from sin, but not because of what he had done to Saul, what he had done to Uriah and Bathsheba, right? So Shimei was partially correct, but Shimei was seeing it from his view, right? And this is why you can't say why God is punishing people or what sins they're being punished for, because only God knows, right? And the Bible, I said, leads us to believe it was from Uriah and Bathsheba. He was technically a man of blood in those respects, but Shimei has it all wrong, and David says, you know what? Let him curse. Remember, Abishai's like, I'll cut his head off. He shouldn't talk to you like that. And normally, David probably would have somebody's head cut off for talking to the king like that. But he says, perhaps God will bless me for all the evil being done to me. So he says, let him curse. And then as he goes on, he continues to fling dust up, and he's staying up there at a safe area from the hills so he couldn't be attacked. And Shimei curses David. And remember, they were very, very weary. And then it cut back to Absalom comes back. He gets into Jerusalem. It flashes back to Jerusalem. And he asks Ahithophel, which was David's wisest counselor, what should I do now? And he says, you should take his concubines up on the roof, and that will really solidify that you're the king. Remember, that was an irreversible damage. He took the 10 concubines who were taking care of the palace. And because of this permanent damage, that means he was taking the throne. That was a public act of taking the throne. And I also talked about how Ahithophel spoke this, and God allowed it to happen because God prophesied. Remember, he said, what you did in private to Bathsheba is going to be done publicly to you. And we see that happen right here. And I'm sure David found out all about it from his network there. And those are the last two chapters that we were in. And now we're going to go ahead and jump into chapter 17. So if you're in your Bibles, we'll go ahead and read there verse by verse. And then do a breakdown of everything going on. So 2 Samuel chapter 17. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace. And the advice seemed right in the eyes of Absalom and all the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say. And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, "Thus has Ahithophel spoken. Shall we do as he says? If not, you speak." Then Hushai said to Absalom, "This time the counsel that Ahithophel has given is not good." Hushai said, "You know that your father and his men are mighty men, and that they are enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert in war. He will not spend the night with the people. Behold, even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits, or in some other place. And as soon as some of the people fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, 'There has been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom.' Then even the valiant man, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and that those who are with him are valiant men. But my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, as the sand by the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we shall come upon him in some place where he is to be found, and we shall light upon him as the dew falls on the ground, and of him and all the men with him not one will be left. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to the city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there." And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel." For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. Then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, "Thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel. And thus and so have I counseled. Now therefore, send quickly and tell David, do not stay tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up." Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting at En-Rogel. A female servant was to go and to tell them, and they were to go and tell the King David, for they were not to be seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So both of them went away quickly and came to the house of a man at Baharim, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. And the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and scattered grain on it, and nothing was known of it. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" And the woman said to them, "They have gone over the brook of water." And when they had sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. After they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. They said to David, "Arise and go quickly over the water, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you." Then David arose, and all the people who were with him, and they crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself, and he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, "The people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness." That is chapter 17. Again, a lot going on here, and we're going to go ahead and break down what was happening with everything here. So first, let's go ahead and we'll look at the first couple verses with Absalom and his receiving of counsel with Ahithophel and Hushai. So it starts out, "Moreover," it's continuing on, "Ahithophel said to Absalom, 'Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight.'" So Ahithophel's getting a force of 12,000 men. That's a pretty good army. It's very significant, very calculated attack here he wants, and he wants to do it tonight, right? He wants an immediate strike, no delay. Why? Well, because David fled. Not only that, David's tired, he's weak. Remember, they're weary at the Jordan River. It already told us that. He's probably panicked, right? That's what happens, and people can act out of their mind sometimes. It can be led into fear, even when they shouldn't be. So he says, while we're at it, we have him on the ropes. We got David on the ropes. We got to go get him now. I'll take care of this, right? And Psalm 3 was actually written around this exact time, Psalm 3, verse 1 and 2, where it says, "O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me." So you can imagine David, hearing about this, knowing that they're hot on his trail, and really being seriously worried, right? Seriously worried. Verse 2 says, "I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged and throw him into a panic. And all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king." So again, Ahithophel knows that David is exhausted. He's emotionally shaken from everything, and he doesn't have a secure defense yet. He's running. He doesn't have time to set up a defense and a plan to fight back. So he's stuck here. So this also involves what you'd call psychological warfare, right? Now, it might be more even if they let things settle, right? But because he's in a panic, when people aren't thinking right, you can really psych them out. So you can cause fear to rise into them. So he knows that if we come approach David, David will be in a panic, right? And he also is aiming to minimize bloodshed. He's making it seem like a good thing. And he's only going to kill David, right? He says, "I'll just kill David and everything will be good," which reminds me of what you hear in Zechariah 13, where it says, "Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered." He knows this even before, he knows that, and this is before Zechariah wrote that if you take out David, his guys are going to be helpless, right? You take out the leader. Anybody in military knows you take out the leaders. You can take out the soldiers, that's fine. But if you take out the generals and the leaders, that really disrupts things with that military. So that's what Ahithophel is recommending here. It says, "I will bring back all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace." So again, this is like manipulative diplomacy here. He's like, if you kill David, it'll be super peaceful, which, do you really think that would happen? I don't think so. It doesn't seem to have ever happened here. And David has some loyal men. They were so loyal to leave Jerusalem again, back into the wilderness with him. And some of these men were probably in the wilderness with him the first time, right? When he met them at the caves of Adullam, and they kind of assembled back then. So they're pretty reliable. He also uses, he's really good, Ahithophel, you can see why he's a wise man. He also uses really good language. He calls it as a bride comes home to her husband. That sounds like a reunion of unity and peace. Again, really good language to make it sound like this will be good. I take out David, just David only, and things will be at peace. We don't have to start a whole war. We don't have to go through that thing that you and that Ishbosheth and David did, and Saul and David. We're sick of civil wars. Let's just take out David, and I'll unify the people like a bride comes back to her husband. He thinks he's preventing a civil war here, and that's what he's trying to say. And he's kind of getting at, you actually hear this in John chapter 11 with Jesus. Another pattern or an echo, a pre-echo, really what Caiaphas says. If you remember, I actually put the verses in here. John 11, verses 49 through 51, you'll remember, says, "But one of them," Caiaphas, who was talking about Jesus, "who was high priest that year, said to them, 'You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish.'" And he did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. That was a prophecy. But even then, it's the whole plan of like, why should the whole nation go through a civil war? If we can just kill this one guy, why should we all punish? Let's have one guy die instead of all of our people and their people and go into this war. I think it'll just be better. Let me lead this army, and I will take David out for you. And look at in verse 4 what it says. "And the advice seemed right in the eyes of Absalom and all the elders of Israel." So not just Absalom, he has his counselors, and they're like, "Yeah, hey, that sounds good to me. Anybody opposed?" Like, no, it sounds pretty genius, actually. He is panicked. I heard he was running out of town, and he was in tears. The people were in tears. This is a pretty good plan, actually. So they seem to all agree, and it shows us again that Ahithophel's influence is very strong. Remember, he is the wisest counselor in the land. And Absalom, that's why Absalom probably feels really good. He has the wisest man on his side, and he just threw out this great, great plan. But we know that God's going to stop it. It will say later, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." And that's what we're about to see here. But you can see just through this beginning, a couple of verses here, that Absalom trusts men over God. Did you see anywhere in here where Absalom said, "Let me pray to the Lord about what we should do"? You never see that. David would always do that. David would say, "What should we do? Should I attack the Philistines? Should I not?" And sometimes God would say yes. Sometimes God would say no. He'd say, "Wait for me. I'll go before you." Where you never see Absalom asking anything. That's foolish, which is why perhaps Absalom could have turned to the Lord, and the Lord maybe would have given him a word. I don't know, but it was never meant to be. And you see this here. So we also see that God's sovereignty overrules man's strategy, because Ahithophel actually probably had a pretty good plan. If they had gone forward with this, David would probably have been in trouble. Let's move now down to verses 5 through 7. Verse 5, then Absalom said, call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear what he has to say. He says, give me a second opinion. Why would you get a second opinion? The wisest man just gave you a really awesome plan that all your elders said, this is going to work. Let's do it. Why would you ask for a second opinion? Well, this is the Lord at work, working in the plans of Absalom. Remember what Proverbs 21 says? The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. So you can see God taking his mind and plants it in his head. You should get a second opinion, Absalom. The Holy Spirit speaking in Absalom's ear. He has no idea. God saying, get a second opinion, even though he just had the wisest man in the kingdom giving him the advice that would have worked, and nobody had a problem with it. And you can see here, Hushai is going to come in as a good double agent, right? And this is exactly why David sent him, right? And if you remember before, a couple chapters ago, David actually prayed when Ahithophel, remember when Ahithophel left? He says, I pray against Ahithophel's counsel. You'll make his counsel be bad, and you'll defeat Absalom that way. If you remember, David actually prayed for this. So these are David's prayers about to be answered here through Hushai. Verse number 6, Absalom said to him, thus has Ahithophel spoken. Shall we do as he says? If not, you speak. So he gives Hushai the exact plan. We don't know if Hushai was standing there or not. He says, hey, here's what Ahithophel said. Ahithophel said I should get 12,000 men, let him kill him, and there will be peace. What do you think, Hushai? Right? He wants to appear also. Absalom's trying to appear as a really wise and balanced man. I just want to be sure, do you agree with this, Hushai? What should we do here? And remember, he thinks Hushai is loyal to him, right? But Hushai is really loyal to David, right? He's still loyal to David, and he's coming as a double agent. Verse 7, then Hushai said to Absalom, this time the counsel that Ahithophel has given is not good. So I love that Hushai, he carefully undermines Ahithophel's plan right here. He says, this time, which is a key. He didn't say, oh, that's terrible advice. He said, this time, like, I know Ahithophel's actually usually right. He's a pretty wise guy, but hey, guys, we all get things wrong. He's got this one wrong this time. This is the first time. I'm just going to let you know, he's a really wise guy, but this time he got it wrong. And he's trying to be persuasive and diplomatic. You just can't say, this guy's an idiot. Why would you listen to Ahithophel, right? He's being very wise here, very calculated, saying, here's one slip up he's had, and here's what I think. And Hushai's tactic is going to be to delay things, as we're going to see here. Verse 8. So Hushai said, you know that your father and his men are mighty men, and that they are enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert in war. He would not spend the night with the people. So here's Hushai, genius, psychological warfare back, right? Ahithophel's right. Hey, he's on the run. We got him scared. Let's go panic him. And Hushai steps in and does psychological warfare back because Ahithophel's probably right. David is in a panic. And Hushai knows this because he was just with David. So he's gonna pitch it as David is the scary lead. You don't want to mess with David. Don't you remember Goliath? Don't you remember the Philistines? You want to fight that guy? Do you know how many people he killed? And you hear this, and you could be manipulated by anybody like this, right? And like, oh, you're right. But remember, that was the David of the past. That was when David had the kingdom united. That's when he had his strength. That was not David when he was panicked. So Hushai is countering with psychological warfare right back, painting David as a dangerous warrior. You do not want to mess with him. He's killed so many people. So he does a great job here. Even, I love the language. He's really good with his language too. The Lord's given him words. Enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs. You guys already know, if you're a hiker, hey, you see baby cubs, you get out of there. Why? Because the mama bear's around, and she's way worse. You don't want her to mess with you, right? So he's painting this picture to stir fear in their hearts. Like he's enraged. You get near him, he's going to kill you all. He'll cut all your heads off. So he's really causing this panic. And you can see here how the Lord is working through him. So it says in verse 9, behold, even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. And as soon as some of the people fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, there's been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. So Hushai basically saying here, guys, you're not going to catch David off guard. He's a master. You think you're just going to catch him in a panic? He's hiding out somewhere. He's hiding, waiting for you. He's got his pit already found, waiting for you guys to come. You know what's going to happen when he kills you guys, one of your guys? You're all going to get panicked, and even your most brave men are going to take off. Do you want embarrassed like that? You need to think about this, guys. It's so genius, really. And it's what's awesome, too, is he's kind of painting the picture. You know, David's actually been in the wilderness before, and perhaps he's really referring to that in 1 Samuel 23:24. He's running from Saul in these exact situations, which actually has prepared David for these situations. But David is still in a panic. So Hushai is kind of buying him some time here. Verse 10, then even the valiant men whose heart is like the heart of a lion will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man and that those who are with him are valiant men. So he's again planning fear. What happens when your guys panic, Absalom? What's going to happen then? What are you going to do then? When you're do you think you're going to be able to keep your guys around? They're all going to abandon you and he'll take his kingdom back. You got to be smart in this, Absalom. So it's pretty amazing. It also shows that fear is contagious, as you guys know this, right? Just talk to somebody about the news. They'll tell you what's going on and whatever, and they'll try to get you panicked. And I've had friends like, did you hear what's going on? It's like, well, settle down. Let's put this in context here, right? People panic, blow things out of proportion. You can even see the plane crashes today. Every time you get a video of a plane crash, you see, I'm not going flying. It's like, you know, our numbers are actually down from last year. They're just televising them more. It will cause panic. It will cause fear in you. That's what they do. But we also know faith also can spread. Faith is also contagious, right? So the opposite of fear, faith you can also encourage somebody. Be strong. I know it looks scary. Be strong. You know what God can do for you. That's also contagious. So be sure, are you causing fear or faith in people? Because we know that can happen to Christians, good Christians. You can get caught up in fear or caught up in faith when it might be a scary situation, but God encourages you, and we can encourage one another here. But you can see here, there's a lot of fear going back and forth here with Hushai, and it's all according to God's plan. Verse 11, but my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you from Dan to Beersheba as the sand by the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So this is going to be a time-consuming process, exactly what Hushai's plan is. Hushai wants a delay here. He wants to give David time to catch up, rest, come up with a plan. He needs time, right? So he's going to stall. Hushai's running the stall offense, we call it in basketball, where you just burn the clock out, you just pass the ball back and forth until you can get some time, right? That's exactly what's happening here. From Dan to Beersheba, Dan's up north, Beersheba's down south. That's a saying back in the day, from north to south, from head to toe, right? From top to bottom. I want all of Israel to be on your side. We're going to need a really good army here. Again, it would take time. He says, as the sand by the sea. That kind of gives them an invincibility sound. Like, we'll be invincible, like the sand of the sea. He won't ever be able to stop us. But we need to take our time and do this right, Absalom. So he's buying him time, right? And he's also flattering him here because he says that you go to battle in person. Like, don't let Ahithophel go, Absalom. You're the warrior. You should be the one. Why would Ahithophel lead your army? You should lead the attack, Absalom. You're great and mighty. You're mightier than your dad is. I can imagine the extra words that are going on here. So he's also flattering Absalom, which Absalom's full of pride. If you find a prideful person, you just flatter them up, you'll get whatever you want. It's called buttering people up. It's like butter them up and you can get what you want. There's people like this. If they're full of themselves, just butter them up. You'll have a lot easier time. Like, that's just biblical. It's just what happens. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. We're going to see that here. Verse number 12. So we shall come upon him in some place where he is to be found, and we shall light upon him as the dew falls on the ground, and of him and all the men with him, not one will be left. So Hushai is saying, we're going to wipe them all out. We're going to fall on them. We're going to, just like the dew, we're going to cover them. There's going to be no way. And we're not just going to kill King David. We're going to kill them all. Then you'll have no civil war, Absalom. You don't want a civil war. We got to wipe them all out. And this is how we're going to do it. Verse 13, if he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there. Now this kind of warfare would take a long time to build up, which is exactly what David needs. And it's also an exaggeration. Like, we'll take every town. We drag them all out. Nobody will stop it. He just keeps exaggerating and embellishing because it's helping his case, right? And Absalom, usually when these people are so in their minds of pride, everything sounds good to him. Like, yeah, we'll wipe them out. Nobody would stop us. So he's really got him going here. Verse 14 now here says, and Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai, the Archite, is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. So that's the real reason. For the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel. This is exactly what I was saying. This is why we know the Holy Spirit is moving here. Because it wasn't because he needed an actual second opinion. He's not going to listen to Hushai because it's a great idea. He's going to do it because the Lord is making him do it, right? And the Lord is actually, remember, answering David's prayers through all of this. Verse 15, then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so have I counseled. So Hushai shares what Ahithophel is saying. He said, this is what Ahithophel's planning, but this is what I told him to do, to throw them off. Go tell David, what's going on. Verse 16, now therefore send quickly and tell David, do not stay tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up. So he gives them the advice, don't stay here. They're going to come for you. I bought you a little bit of time, but you still got to get moving. Get on the other side of the Jordan. Why? The Jordan's somewhat of a fortress, right? You know, if we were in town here and I'm just down the road, you could come attack me. If I'm across the Susquehanna River and you don't have a boat and no bridges, it's going to be a little more difficult for you to get to me. It causes a hindrance here. And that's how rivers work. That's actually why, if you look in America, all the cities are usually built on rivers. They use them as borders because it just cuts things apart and it makes things difficult to get to the other side. So he's saying, get across the Jordan. It's going to be a big task. David has families. They have children, women and children with him. He says, get everybody across the river. It's going to buy you some time and you're going to need it. And that's what's going on here. So it also shows that when God gives us insight, we got to respond quickly. So he's saying, you don't have time to mess around, David. Here's how you do it. You got to do it. You got to act fast. Here's the plan. You got to go. So he's giving them some urgency here. Verse 17. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting at En-Rogel. A female servant was to go and tell them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they were not to be seen entering the cities. So why shouldn't they be seen entering the city? Well, suspicion. What are those guys doing, right? They had to avoid the suspicion of what was going on. Remember, you don't want your spies to be seen communicating with one another. It's a spy network. You got to keep things contained. It says go undercover, right? And I love a female servant takes this. So it shows God uses both men and women in courageous roles, right? He has a woman go deliver this message. She's going to partake in helping people here with this strategy. Verse 18, but a young man saw them and told Absalom. So both of them went away quickly and came to the house of a man at Baharim who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. So, secret breach, momentary breach here. They caught us. We got to panic, run. We got to hide. They saw us. They weren't supposed to see us, and they saw us. And they probably felt panicked, like, here we go. We're stuck. So they go to Baharim, which is actually where Shimei was from, if you remember. It's right around Jerusalem, same area there, and they hide in a well, which is probably like this, kind of in the ground, a flat hole in the ground. That's where they would draw well out of, or water out of, in their well there. Verse 19 says, and the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and scattered grain on it, and nothing was known of it. So you see this well here, she throws something over it, puts grain, looks like a working place. You have no idea a well is even there. She has it all covered up and hidden, right? We move on down here then to verse 20. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said to them, they've gone over the brook of water. And when they had sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. Now, you guys are probably saying, I've read this before. I didn't think I read this before, but I read this before somewhere. You did. Joshua chapter 2. Remember when Rahab hides the two spies and they hide? She's hiding two spies on a roof, puts things over top of them. They say, hey, where are those two men? Oh, they went over there. And then when they leave, they come out. So you can see this pattern again of a woman hiding, protecting two brave men who are spying out the land. They're spies. They're literally spies, just like the Rahab story. It's another pattern over and over again is happening. So they hide in the well, and the guys come to get them, and she sends them off in the wrong direction to protect the men, just like Rahab did, right? God gave her the wisdom. It's the same thing going on here. So I think that's pretty interesting. Verse 21, and after they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. They said to David, arise and go quickly over the water, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you. So again, they're kind of urging him. Remember, this got to be quick, David. You got to go. Arise, go quickly. You're going to have to get this word to them. So they warn David, give them the advantage of escaping this trap. There's a trap coming, and he's able to know it's coming, which again, more you can see Proverbs lived out through this whole book here. Proverbs 27:12, the prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it, right? So he sees there's danger. We got to hide. We got to get out of here. There is danger. And this is exactly why David had this network here, to get this kind of information. Without that genius network, communication network from a couple chapters ago, David would have got caught blindsided, would have got taken. So this is all God working with David's wisdom and the spies, protecting them from getting caught. So you can see that here. Verse 22, then David arose and all the people who were with him, and they crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. So David doesn't delay. He listens to exactly what they said. Well, we better get everybody together. And like women, children, men, get everybody in line. We got to get us over the river here. And they're probably like, oh man, this is going to be quite a task, right? But we got to do this. So, and again, the Jordan is that symbolic barrier of safety. So they're going to cross over the Jordan and they're going to feel a lot safer. And it says they did that, and not one was, by daybreak, not one was left. So overnight, he's able to get everybody, which is a decent sized camp, across the river. And imagine trying to take kids across a rushing Jordan River, right? It would have been difficult, but they did it. So this is a big task. And it shows excellent leadership and excellent coordination. because David is a great leader. So him and his men administer this whole thing. They come up with a plan. They have a whole system where they're going to get everybody over, and it works by the morning. So you can see they've acted fast and they've acted wise, and they're very organized and strategic. God is working through them. There's also a reminder, God protects his people through providence and human partnerships. He used these people here, divine providence. Those spies saw him, but God had a woman right there with a well right there to hide them. He got this information to David. He helped David get all these people over. So you can see God working and providing through all these people in this whole situation here. And I love it's like, it's kind of like the book of Esther. People will say they don't want the book of Esther in the Bible because it's the only book that doesn't say God's name. But you can see God throughout the entire book working, right? It's like this here. And it's like this in my own life. When amazing things happen, and I just see, just by coincidence, this person came in and I was able to say this, and it changed this situation. Of course, it didn't say, then God sent somebody to Eric Attinger and did this. It's like, it doesn't do that. But I can see God's here, and God sent them, right? It's the same thing here. You can see God's fingerprints all over this, although it hasn't mentioned, other than with the whole Hushai thing, that the Lord did that. But you can see God orchestrated this whole thing, the woman, the well right there, the plan to cover it up. God is planting ideas. He's orchestrating everything here. I think it's pretty amazing. And then here to end the chapter, last couple verses. Verse 23, when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself. And he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. This is one of the most tragic suicides recorded in the Old Testament, but he does commit suicide here. He realized that his counsel was rejected. And at first we're like, man, talk about throwing a hissy fit because you didn't get your own way and you're just going to kill yourself. And you hear people say, oh, I'm no good, I'm stupid, they didn't even listen to me, I'm so dumb. And you can think at first, Ahithophel probably was worked up, like, nobody's ever not taken my advice before. I don't know what to do with myself. And this can happen to people if your identity is in your abilities and your things, and when you fail, this could definitely happen to you. So I'm sure he was in his own mind, but not only that, it was most likely not only out of emotion, but calculation. Why do I say that? Well, because Ahithophel's pretty wise, and he says, well, they didn't listen to my plan. They're being dumb. They're going to listen to that Hushai guy, and David's going to kill him. David's going to come back and take over. Oh, and I just double-crossed David. I'm going to die anyway. He's going to come back and he's going to kill me. I might as well take care of it myself. So he sets his house in order and says, I'm going to do it before he gets to me. So I think Ahithophel is, again, he's a wise man. He's not stupid. Sure, he was probably worked up and frustrated they didn't listen to him, but he knows, he sees the writing on the wall. They are not going to stop David and his men. They took too long. I told them they should have went right away, and now because of that, we're all going to die. I'm getting it out of the way. And I think that's how Ahithophel felt here with this, which is really interesting because remember, a lot of people, I think Ahithophel is another version of Judas. Judas comes later, but the pattern of people. And what happened after Judas double-crossed Jesus? Oh, that's it. I'm going to go out, hang myself. And he does the same thing. He kills himself too after realizing that his plan has been foiled, right? Same kind of concept here. So Ahithophel is very much like Judas in that respect. Verse 24, then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. So Mahanaim, that shows that he was east of the Jordan. It's a place of safety. It's also a place of prior significance. This is where Ishbosheth ruled. If you remember, after Saul's death, he ruled in this town across the Jordan River, right? And Jacob also met angels here. Jacob's also the one that named it Mahanaim. In Genesis 32, you can read about that. But when David finally regroups now, and now Absalom crosses the Jordan River. Remember, Absalom's leading the charge. He's listening to Hushai. Because in Ahithophel's plan, Absalom is going to stay back. But Absalom is listening to Hushai. He's crossing over with all the men of Israel. It means a pretty good army. It means most of the people coming are on Absalom's side, right? What's really cool here is Mahanaim is still going to be a stronghold. So even though he's in the wilderness, God still provides points of safety. Just like he had the cave of Adullam and all those other places for David, he has another place, Mahanaim. He's going to be safe here, even though he's away from home. God will still provide safe places that you can be, and you can be at somewhat of a rest here. Verse 25, now Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. So this is a bold move. Absalom's going to replace his cousin Joab with another relative of his, Amasa, right? So this is Absalom's cousin, just like, it was David's nephew is Joab. This is Absalom's cousin. He's going to trust another family member, but not Joab. So he alienates Joab as a seasoned warrior, but maybe for good reason. Remember, he set Joab's field on fire. So I actually think it's probably wise of Absalom, because it might not have went well, because Joab's kind of upset with him over that and over a lot of other things, right? So he puts Amasa over top of him here. Verse 26, and Israel and Absalom encamped at the land of Gilead. So this is showing now the stage is set for the battle. David's at Mahanaim. Now they're setting up camp in Gilead. This is exactly what's about to happen. It's war. The war camps are both being set up here, right? And so they're in Gilead, which is northeast of the Jordan River, opposite of Mahanaim. So literally kind of across from each other. They're getting pretty close. So the kingdom is now literally and spiritually, it was spiritually divided before. Now it's literally divided. You can literally see the divide. David and his men, Absalom and his men, and they're about to go to war. And then we see in the last three verses here, verse 27, when David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, the son of Ammiel from Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim. So these three men right here. First, Shobi, look who he is, the son of Nahash. That's the former Ammonite king. Isn't that interesting, right? So David once fought against Nahash's family in 2 Samuel chapter 10, if you remember. So this is one of his family members. And there's a chance, some people think that maybe David set up Shobi as like a puppet ruler after he took over in Rabbah. So Shobi's kind of on his side. But it's really interesting. Shobi is a foreigner, showing David more kindness here than some of his own people of Israel, right? You also have who else? Machir from Lodabar. Does anybody remember Machir from Lodabar? I know it's an obscure name, but we actually read it earlier in 2 Samuel 9, right? Because this is the guy that was caring for Mephibosheth when he was in Lodabar. Remember he's in Lodabar? And he goes over and he finds it with Machir from Lodabar. So this guy was taking care of Mephibosheth, and hey, he loves David. David just came and helped that Mephibosheth guy. How awesome is that? Well, I'm going to help David. I love that guy too. I'm going to go help him too. So you got Shobi, who's a foreigner. You got Machir, who used to help Mephibosheth. He's known for his kindness and generosity. He has that kindness and generous spirit. And then you got Barzillai, the Gileadite, was probably an elderly, wealthy man from Rogelim here. So it's really interesting here how, sometimes help can come from unexpected places. You'd expect to get help from the Israelites, but he's getting help from all these foreign people you didn't really know that well. God can send you help from all kinds of unexpected places and unexpected people, as we see here. And then what do we see in verse 28 and 29, the last two verses? They brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. So they got beds, that shows rest. They're going to give them some place to rest. Basins and vessels, that's for cleanliness, daily needs, right? To stay clean. And of course, a variety of foods, it isn't just like in the wilderness where they just got bread. They got you got all that stuff, honey, cheese, all this stuff, a smorgasbord from these three guys. How awesome is that, right? So he's providing their physical needs, I'm sure their emotional needs, getting somebody to come by when you're in your lowest. It kind of reminds me of somebody has a family member that dies and they're struggling, and what do? You show up, hey, we brought you this meal. We got this meal here, don't worry about cooking. And that's encouraging. Not only for the food is it nice to not have to cook, but it's encouraging to know that people care about you when you're down and out. So this is kind of a similar situation here. They're bringing him all of these nice things to strengthen him. You can also see God's providence here, right? Refreshing David, providing food. We've seen it with manna in the past. Later on, we didn't get to it yet, but remember Elijah? Remember how he was fed? By ravens? Bringing meat? Talk about being helped in unexpected places. I've never had a bird bring me dinner every day, let alone. Think about that. It shows that God will provide. You might say, I don't know how we're going to do this. We're out of money, or we're so far away from I don't know what we're going to do, how we're going to. God will provide, right? And that's what we see here, very much like he will do later with Elijah, like he did for him so long, like he did in the wilderness. Those are miraculous. These don't look as miraculous, but I'm telling you what, the manna in the wilderness, the raven bringing meat, and Shobi and Machir and Barzillai bringing this, it was all God. This is just done in a more of a less miraculous way. We'd say, well, that wasn't a miracle. This is just as much a miracle to David as it was to Elijah and the people in the wilderness back then, right? God will provide for you when you need it, because they're out in the desert. And not only that, think about what happened last chapter. What did Ziba do? Brought him food. God has just been sending people left and right to provide for David. And probably David's after this is like, you know what? God's going to take care of us. He's bringing us food. He's bringing us not only just food, honey and cheese, all this great stuff. We've got beds. We've got things to wash with. How great is God? So you can see him here that God is just working everything out. And when God's people are in trouble, God will send you help, right? That's what this shows. If you're in trouble and you trust in the Lord, God will help you. He's done it in many different ways here. And this is how chapter 17 ends. Does anybody have any questions or comments based on chapter 17 or anything that it might have had you think of? Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
I do. When you went through this chapter, what went in my mind, how wonderful our God is. To me, I'm thinking, why didn't he name, instead of the names your name, why didn't he say, well, Private Harry back then will help me. I'll send Patricia to bring the food. I think the amazing words that you can't, to me, I could not read the 17th chapter and understand all because I couldn't get all the names. But if the names were familiar, I could understand. I understand the plot and how God was handled it. Amen. But the names just blow my mind, so I have to get back in.
Yes.
So I think of that. Why is the Bible like that?
Right.
Why is it? If it was a book or something I could read, I'd understand it very good. But it is very, to me, I have to go back. Man, where's the beach to Harry's? I don't.
What's funny is if the people were here, they go, what kind of names are these? Bill, Eric, Matt? I can't even pronounce. How do you even say these things? Which is funny. They'd say the same thing about us. Obviously, they live in a different time. If you go over to the Middle East, there's going to be names that you still struggle to say, even today that live there. But what's really important, actually the big thing, and it's okay to skip over the names and just say M and B and S. Like, you don't have to say Shobi and Maki, you don't have to do all that. But there is a really profound thing in here. The reason it doesn't say, like, 3 men helped David. It's very calculated in the Bible. Why? You start to go down back then. It's called, big thing was names back then. Which is why there's no other name greater than the name of Jesus. Why? Because names have meaning and power. And Jesus, or Yeshua, all his name really means is Yahweh saves. Built right in the name. And everybody's life was built right in their name. Did you know what Noah's name means? Comfort or rest. Why? Because that's what God was going to provide through him. Do you know what Enoch, the wisest man, you know what his name means? Teaching. I bet he taught a lot of people. You know what Adam what means? Man, first guy, right? Seth means appointed. Well, he was the appointed one to take over for, Cain and Abel, that whole situation. What's really profound is even if you can't pronounce the name, just sometimes go on there and look up what their name means. And you'll go, that makes so much sense. I know why God had them named that. So when you read names in there, especially when you get to like the ones we always want to skip, like Numbers or Chronicles, or Ezra. I was just reading Ezra 10. It's like, it's like a bunch of 100 names. Let's skip down there. If you really stop, you can do a whole Bible study. Just translate every single one of those names, and the story will mean something completely different to you when you do that. And you don't have to memorize what they all mean. We're blessed enough to have technology where you can find the Hebrew, the Greek, and just, you have AI now. Hey, I'm in chapter 17. AI, translate all these names for me. What do they mean? So we live in a time where we could do this. You live back in the day in the 40s or 50s or even 70s. We didn't have the internet. You didn't have all this stuff. And you just had to suffer through it and say, whatever those names are, that's cool with me. So it's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
That's why they gave God, names. And
Absolutely.
They gave the altars names and locations.
They always named them. And the
name you'll remember.
Correct. And the name remember, and it will tell the story when you hear those names. So that's why God's name, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. So that's what those names are. Those we all know, and you can translate all those names that sounded, the first time you ever heard Jehovah Jireh, you're like, what's that about? But then the Lord will provide. It makes so much sense. And that's why you use God has different names for different times when he's providing different things, right? So right here, Jehovah Jireh. He was providing for David and his people. So it's amazing to see that. So yeah, the names are tricky. Took me a while to pronounce them until I got the hang of like Hebrew a little bit. But it's still, sometimes I'm still, making it up. You can still wing it if you don't know it, and whatever it means. But if you really want to get to the bottom of it, translate those names and the Bible will take on a whole other level of meaning to you in these stories. Anybody else have anything they want to add or say? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
That sounds really
When
weird.
David fled, was that a weakness?
So some people would say that was a weakness. You should have fought, right? I think it was wise because he was frazzled, and he needed to regroup, right? And it was smart. Had he stayed there, a war could have broke out right in Jerusalem, and a lot of innocent people could have died. So I think this is a sign of wisdom. It's kind of like, I'm really glad you asked this, right? When this happens almost every generation, all of you guys were kids at different decades. You guys were in school. So when that bully, if that person punches you, just go away. Just go away from him. The other guy goes, no, punch him back. Don't be a weak. Don't be a sissy. Get in the fight and punch him right back in the nose. And so some people will say, be the bigger man and walk away. sometimes walking away prevents more bloodshed or more pain, right? It prevents things from escalating. And I think David here was being the bigger man and walking away to save lives. But not only that, God was working in him with wisdom. So he could go, regroup, and he could trap Absalom. If he stayed, I think David was wise enough. If they stayed, there's a chance David loses that. So some people will say he was weak for running, but I think he was wise. He was wise in this instance for running. So, well, thank you, everybody. It was a great another Bible study. Keep reading ahead. We'll be in chapter 18. Next week it'll be Easter, so the following week we'll come back to that. So keep reading your Bibles, and we'll be back, Lord willing. But until then, keep your lamps trimmed and burning. There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back to another Bible study. We are in 2 Samuel again. We'll be in chapter 18 this morning, moving right along. So you can open up your Bibles a while, get into 2 Samuel chapter 18. And I know it's been a couple weeks, so we're going to go ahead and, as always, just do a quick refresher of what's going on. So this chapter makes even more sense to us. Like I said, you can always read the Bible wherever you're at, but it's always nice to read it in a flowing context of what's been going on. So we know back in chapter 15, after Absalom, David's son was able to come back after killing, remember, he murdered Amnon for violating Tamar. He was able to come back, and he started this conspiracy to take over the throne, if you remember that. He was out at the gate convincing the men of Israel, and he stole their hearts away, it said. So David was wise and said, we better flee out of here. Absalom could kill us. It could be really bad. I don't want this war to happen. So him and his people fled. It was a really sad situation, but they got out of there. And David was still a very wise man, right? God's given him a lot of wisdom. So he arranged a secret communication network of spies that would report back to him in the wilderness, so he knew exactly what was going on back home, which was very important. Then in chapter 16, 2 chapters ago, we heard about how Ziba came with food, which is exactly what his people needed, food. He came there, and we know that Ziba was probably here to convince David to trick him to think Mephibosheth is turning on him. A lot of us believe that Ziba was manipulating David here in his low point, and David said, sure, thanks for the food, whatever you want. You can have Mephibosheth's land. Take it all. It's yours now. So we learned about how Ziba did that. That'll come back around later. And then we learned about a guy named Shimei. Remember, Shimei was a Benjaminite who was from Saul's family, and he hid up on the hill. He was afraid to get too close. He was actually probably wise to get too close. And he was throwing rocks at the people, and David said, Abishai's like, let me go cut his head off. Literally says, let me cut his head off. And that's probably what would happen in regular circumstances if he said something like this to the king. But David says, no, let God, maybe God told him to curse me. Even though Shimei was wrong, because Shimei was blaming this whole thing because of what he did to Saul. While he was half right, God was probably doing all this because of what he did to Uriah and Bathsheba, right? And David allows him, he throws dust and rocks at the people all the way. It says David's men were very weary. It was already a long journey, and then they're getting dust and rocks thrown at them. Not very fun. And then we learned to end that chapter, Absalom entered Jerusalem, and that prophecy was fulfilled, that what David did in private would be brought to light against him. And Ahithophel, one of David's wisest counselors, convinces Absalom to take David's 10 concubines in public and violate them, and the sin continues to go on and on and on. And that was also a really big statement, because that meant he was taking the throne, and it's something you can't undo. He could not undo that and apologize to his dad. It was like a permanent thing in Israel for somebody to do something like that. Then the last chapter we covered was chapter 17. If you remember, Absalom received counsel of what to do. Ahithophel had a wise plan. He said, hey, let me lead 12,000 men, and I'll go, and we'll take out David. It'll be quick and easy. We'll just kill David. That's all we want, and we'll get out of there, and you'll be king. But Hushai, remember, he was sent there as a double agent and said, no. You should gather all the people, and you should go yourself, Absalom. And he played upon his pride, because Absalom was full of himself. So it's easy to manipulate prideful people by playing into their ego. We do know this is true. And Absalom fell victim to that. Hushai talks him into it, and Hushai was really stalling, right? He was running the stall offense. So they could get David some time to regroup, because remember, they were really tired and weary, and they had to cross the Jordan River. They were still close, so they crossed that Jordan River then. And then remember, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, the two spies, we saw a biblical pattern, just like the story of Rahab. Rahab, the woman who had to hide the two spies, they also got hid in a well because they were spotted. They were trying to be discreet, but they were spotted by somebody, and Absalom's people were tipped off, hid them in the well. They were safe, and the message was preserved, just like we've seen before in scriptures. And then to end the chapter, we saw again Shobi, Machir, and Barzillai bring David and his men more provisions, more food. And it's just amazing to see how, Ziba and then these three men are bringing food out into the wilderness. You think of a wilderness, almost like a desert. There's not a lot going on out there. They couldn't bring a bunch of cattle or anything like that. So we saw how God provides, just kind of what we talked about earlier, how God provides provisions for the church. He provides provisions for his people. And it's very similar to Elijah. If you remember, Elijah has one of the most miraculous provisions where a raven was bringing him food every day, which is pretty wild. Could you imagine like a bird delivering your lunch every day? That's pretty wild. Doesn't happen often, if ever again, but that happened for Elijah. And it's just more proof that God is always providing, which leads us into chapter 18. So we'll go ahead, like we usually do. We'll read all chapter 18 and break it down verse by verse to see what's going on here. All right. Verse number 1. Then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David sent out the army, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. But the men said, You shall not go out, for if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore it is better that you send us help from the city. The king said to them, Whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate, while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders about Absalom. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword. And Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Joab said to the man who told him, What, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, Even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not reach out my hand against the king's son, for in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, For my sake protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And 10 young men, Joab's armor-bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Then Joab blew the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained them. And they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest and raised over him a very great heap of stones. And all Israel fled everyone to his own home. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself the pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, Let me run and carry news to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the hand of his enemies. And Joab said to him, You are not to carry news today. You may carry news another day, but today you shall carry no news, because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to the Cushite, Go, tell the king what you have seen. The Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, Come what may, let me also run after the Cushite. And Joab said, Why will you run, my son, seeing that you have no reward for the news? Come what may, he said, I will run. So he said to him, Run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the 2 gates, and the watchman went up to the roof of the gate by the wall, and when he lifted up his eyes and looked, he saw a man running alone. The watchman called out and told the king, and the king said, If he is alone, there is news in his mouth. And he drew nearer and nearer. The watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gate and said, See, another man running alone. The king said, He also brings news. The watchman said, I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king said, He is a good man and comes with good news. Then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, All is well. And he bowed before the king with face to the earth and said, Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king. And the king said, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant, your servant, I saw a great commotion, but I do not know what it was." And the king said, "Turn aside and stand here." So he turned aside and stood still. And behold, the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, "Good news for my lord the king, for the Lord has delivered you this day from the hand of all who rose up against you." The king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" And the Cushite answered, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man." And the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." And that's how the chapter ends. A lot going on here. A really eventful chapter. We'll go ahead and start here with the first couple verses, where David organizes his army for the battle in those first 8 verses. So if you look in the beginning, it says, David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. So we see David's back in leadership mode. He knows we're about to go to war. He's experienced in this. And you see it was, thousands and hundreds. This is Israel military organization tactics we've seen before. He's no novice. He's a pro at this. And he knows they need organization to win. That's what he does. Verse 2 says, "And David sent out the army, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you." So he breaks them this time into 3 divisions. He has Joab, who's been his longtime general, right? A really trustworthy, always impulsive and very ruthless at times. Joab's been a pretty trustworthy leader. They've won many battles with him at the head. Abishai, which remember, that's Joab's brother, the same guy that was ready to cut off the head of Shimei when he was cursing them. Very fierce, loyal man. Again, a little bit violent. We know the sons of Zeruiah were very violent men, but they were trustworthy leaders. And then the interesting third one was Ittai the Gittite. And if you remember, Ittai the Gittite was a Philistine exile. He was a former Philistine that came over. We read about in 2 Samuel 15. He came over, and David was amazed, so amazed by his loyalty here, that he actually puts him in charge of 1/3 of his army. So a foreigner, there's actually a foreigner leading the army, which I'm sure some of the Israelites are like, this is really strange. Some of his men are probably, this is strange, but we trust David and what he's doing. And they probably saw that Ittai was a pretty strong warrior and also knew what he was doing. And this is a reminder to us, just like always, that God can raise up very unlikely people for significant roles, right? And it also shows us the promise of the Gentiles being included in God's plan, right? So you see, even here in this big civil war, remember, this is another civil war. David's seen them over and over again. In the civil war, a Gentile is going to be in here and help David win this battle here. It says, the king said, I myself will also go out with you. So this is interesting. David this time says, I'll go out and fight, probably for a few reasons. One, he's showing personal courage here. He's showing that he's courageous. He's a strong leader, and he'll fight alongside the men. But also, remember when the whole Bathsheba thing happened? What was the problem? He was supposed to be out fighting, and he stayed back. So that's got to be in the back of his mind. Like, all right, I'm not letting anything else bad happen. I'm the king. I should be out on the battlefield, right? And maybe even another reason. There's probably, sometimes there can be multiple reasons, right, why these things happen. Another one, who are they going to battle against? His son Absalom. So he's like, I want to be there, just like we want to be there. I want to be there to make sure everything goes okay and goes as planned. So I'll be involved in this as well. He wants to have a little bit of a hand in this. So you can see a lot going on just in his statement there if you read into it. There's a lot of reasons why he might want to do that. Continues on, but the men said, you shall not go out. For if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better that you send us help from the city. So the troops refused David's offer. They recognize his importance, which is very true. They're basically saying, you're not going to care about us, which, if you remember, Ahithophel did have this whole thing that they were just going to kill David alone. So and remember that whole plan from Hushai got to them. So they probably said, hey, listen, they're only coming for you. They don't even care about us. They do not care about us at all. You are worth 10,000, which they're making this big thing, showing them how important he really is. And they say, you know what a better strategy would be, David? If you stayed back and had the reserves ready to go. So if the battle goes bad, you can send out reserves and bring them out. So you're going to be in the reserves, right? And the military has that now. You send out people in the military. We always have reserves ready to go if things get bad, right? So this is a really wise plan here. And I love we see later on here in verse 4, then the king said to them, Whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. So I love this. David, a really good leader again. David had his own plan. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to lead you guys. I'm going to be a strong leader. And they say, whoa, wouldn't it be wiser if you stayed because you're so valuable and we go? And he yields to their counsel. It doesn't mean that he's a weak leader. It means that he thought about it and said, you know what, that's pretty wise. And the three of you all agree on that. I think that makes sense. So it shows that he's able to change his mind when a good plan is brought to him, right? And that's why it says kings are supposed to have many counselors. Only a fool would have no counselors, it says. So he's showing wisdom here, that he leads like a good king. And he's going to be here standing by the gate. And the city gate was where kings would give blessings and they give farewells there. So he's kind of standing at the end of the gate, kind of leading from the gate there, sending them all out. And again, it shows us sometimes true leadership, David's showing us, is letting go of control. That's a really hard thing to do, right? Especially when you want things to all go well, especially when Absalom is there fighting. But he knows what's best is to let go of control and really never let go of control because he knows God's in control. He's never really been in control. So if he trusts God, he doesn't have to be there. He can trust in his men that God will oversee it, and it was a wise plan. So he's going to let them and trust his men to lead. And you see here the order and unity, because all the army marched out by hundreds and thousands. So you can see there's that order and unity in David's army. They're very organized, ready to go in the battle. And it continues on. The king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders about Absalom. And this is kind of a foreshadowing because he says this and says, hey, and everybody heard it. He said, be careful of Absalom. It wasn't some secret executive order meeting. Like, hey, shut the door. You three men come in here. It was no, for everybody to hear. Now, I want you to win this war, but I want you to deal well with, what did he say? The young man Absalom. We could have maybe said, I want you to take out that traitor or that rebel or my enemy, right? Those are terms usually used in war. But he's still using this endearing language because it's his own flesh and blood. It's his son. Could you imagine having to go to war with your own relative that you loved? It's a crazy thought. But that's what David had to go through. So you can imagine the turmoil, which is why he's using this kind of language. And he's commanding them, listen, if you win the war, I don't want him dead or alive. I want him alive, right? You see those posters back in the day, dead or alive, we want him. But he did not want him dead. He's saying, hey, be really careful when you win this war. I know we got to win, but I want you to be gentle with the young man Absalom. And everybody hears it, right? Everybody hears it. And you can see actually what's really interesting too is some things, of course, in the Bible playing out. Proverbs 17:25, a foolish son is a grief to his father. But you can see he is a grief to his father. It's causing all kinds of issues, but David still is having a tough time dealing with that. He's kind of like the prodigal father, or the prodigal son, the father of the prodigal son, where it says Solomon felt compassion and ran to him. You can still see David's heart there, probably hoping that Absalom would just turn and say, I surrender. I quit, Dad, it's your kingdom. That was probably David's greatest wish here. But you can see again that tension still living in David between justice and mercy. That's really hard as a leader, right? Should we bring justice for the crime and the sin committed? Or should I show mercy like the Lord shows? And he is struggling with this because he knows he needs to win the war, but he also wants to show mercy to his son. Verse 6. So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. This is a really important piece here because forests were dense and rugged terrain. It wasn't like fighting out on a plain, right? It'd be like going out on a hike in the woods sometimes. You got to be careful where you walk. There's stones, there's snakes, there's trees, branches everywhere. So it was a really tough place to fight. And a forest, usually in the Bible, you see it in Isaiah chapter 10, it symbolizes or represents danger, entrapment, or judgment. So if you know this, you can look at this and say, uh-oh, something's about to happen. They're not having a battle in the usual plains of a battle or whatever it is. It's going to be fought in this rugged terrain. And we've got to remember that sometimes God uses the environment itself, right? We've seen that in Joshua. Remember Joshua was fighting, and you'll see later it'll say the forest killed more men than the men, and that happened with Joshua. The hailstones killed more men than the actual soldiers did. So you can see God is in charge of the environment. He's in charge of nature. He's in control of this whole battle, and he is in control, coaxing them into this dangerous forest to have this battle. And it says in verse 7, the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the loss was great on that day, 20,000 men. That's not a small war. 20,000. Think about seeing 20,000 people in a football stadium or whatever, and imagine all them being killed in a war. That's a big, bloody battle. They were getting slaughtered. God was giving the battle right to David and his men. So the men of Israel, although that's tricky at first, you think it's David's men, that's actually, remember, the men of Israel, it said, had gone with Absalom. So those are Absalom's men dropping like flies, right? One by one. And it reminds us again of Psalm 33. The king is not saved by his great army, and the war horse is a false hope for salvation. You can see right here, God is the one winning all of the battle. And it says in verse 8, the battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured. There it is, more people that day than the sword. And like I said, God is in charge. God's sovereignty reigns here. Nature is killing more men than the men themselves. So you can see again, God is the one fighting this battle. He can use his creation for anything, right? He can even use his creation for war. It's kind of a crazy concept. You can actually read in history, if you get into the world wars and stuff, when they went up and the Germans were going up to Russia, the winner is what saved. If you see the Germans could have taken over Russia, if you get into that history, the harsh winter had a real effect on war, and that stuff still happens today. So you can see God can use nature and still be fighting the battle without weapons. He can fight with his creation itself. All right, now I'll move into the part with Absalom here. And Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick of the branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. And look what it says there, he just happened to. Again, that's showing us there's a synchronicity here. From a human standpoint, like, wow, what are the odds of that? We're in the forest, he just happens to get stuck. But it's a sign here that God divinely ordered this. This is why God had the battle happen in the forest. If God had the battle happen in the plains, Absalom doesn't get stuck in a tree. It has to happen some other way, right? But remember earlier in 2 Samuel 14, verse 11, remember when that woman was doing that story in Tekoa, and I talked about how it was this weird prophecy where David said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. And he didn't know he was talking about himself. That ends up becoming prophetic and fulfilled because his hair is literally stuck in the tree. It does not fall to the ground. He is suspended, it says, between heaven and earth. And remember, when we got the Absalom's first explanation of who he was, we heard about his long flowing hair, and he'd get it cut only because it was so heavy. He's full of pride. So we see his pride ends up in destruction, which is exactly what the Bible is saying over and over again. He's also suspended between heaven and earth, which shows us he's been rejected by earth. He's been rejected by the men there, but he's also been rejected by heaven. So I know he's literally there, but you can also see a spiritual aspect. God is rejecting his kingship. The men on earth are rejecting. So he is balanced. He's hanging between heaven and earth. He is not accepted anywhere. And you can see that even in this literal sense as well as a spiritual sense. And now he's exposed and helpless. He thought he was this mighty warrior and control everything, and he's actually helpless. And guess what? He's been helpless and exposed this whole time. He's just now seeing it come to fruition here. In verse 10, a certain man saw it and told Joab, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. So instead of killing him, he goes and tells Joab. In verse 11, we see Joab said to the man who told him, what, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. So remember, Joab is this fierce, ruthless, remember we talked about, he's a ruthless killer. He doesn't care about, gentleness. He doesn't care that David said to deal gently like this man did. He wants to kill him. He said, I would have gave you a lot of rewards. I would have gave you all this stuff for doing it. You would have been rewarded if you would have done it. So Joab shows he doesn't care about David and the compassion he wants on Absalom. He just wants violence and to settle the issues. And you can see what the problem with zeal without mercy is. The zeal of the Lord can be good, but without mercy it can get out of hand. That is like Joab's whole entire life as you read through this. Verse 12, but the man said to Joab, even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not reach out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake protect the young man Absalom. So the unnamed soldier is more loyal to David. He refuses a bribe. He shows us what good honor is. He could have had a lot of wealth from this. He could have been honored greatly, but he knew the right thing. Listen to the king, right? And it kind of reminds us of Psalm 119, although it's talking about God, but you can see even here, I have stored up your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. You can even see that little thing lived out here through this guy. He has integrity over riches. And I love what he says here in verse 13. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there's nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. He's wise, he's not stupid. He's saying, Joab, if I would have killed him, you would have ratted me out and said I was the one that did it anyway. And the king always finds out. We couldn't have kept the secret from him. David finds everything out. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be self-serving and disloyal. It would have come against me anyway, and you would have turned against me, Joab. This guy's pretty wise. He turned down a bribe, and he knows, Joab, you would have backstabbed me. I'm not stupid, right? So Joab's probably even more furious, and he says, I will not waste time like this with you. It's typical Joab. And he took 3 javelins in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. So again, Joab's impatience and disregard for David's orders. He doesn't think about what the right thing to do is. He's just impulsive. Let's kill him now. And it's kind of excessive. 3 javelins to the heart. I think 1 would have killed him, right? Yeah, Matt does track. The javelins, they're pretty sharp. 1 through the heart would probably do it. You don't need 3. So you see Joab, and why is he mad? Well, remember when he set his field on fire? Probably is also in the back of his head. This guy turned against the king and he set my field on fire. I can finally get revenge. And he overdoes it, right? He kills him 3 to the heart. So it shows Joab's disdain for Absalom. Verse 15, and 10 young men, Joab's armors, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Joab, again wise, has 10 other guys do it. So it's like, hey, David, it wasn't just me. There's 11 of us. There was like, these guys were killed. It's like, Joab, you stabbed him 3 times in the heart. He was going to die. And then you order these 10 men to do it. Like, come on, dude. So Joab is covering his tracks. So the guy that didn't kill him knew exactly who Joab was, right? Because Joab now covered it. It wasn't just me. It was all of us, right? It was all of us. Some people say, maybe there's also a truth to this too, but I think he's going to die anyway. That it's kind of like the firing squad. Well, we don't know who killed him. I stabbed him, but so did they. Well, I don't know which one killed him. So it could be me, it could be them. I don't know who did it. So again, he's covering his tracks. Joab's wise, but also in a bad way here. He's kind of being a little cunning here. Then we see in verse 16, then Joab blew the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained them. So remember, blowing the trumpet, it halts the battle when you blow the trumpet, which I think is really interesting. When Jesus comes back for us, they're going to blow the trumpet. Our war is over. We can come back from the battle. The Lord will take us home. So you can see that here. The trumpet always signals it's over. From distances away, the guys heard it and said, oh, cool, we won. Or we got to retreat, one or the other. But I think it's good. They're blowing the trumpet. Let's go home. So he does that. And he's not stupid. Joab actually shows restraint here. It's the one time you see Joab show restraint. Why is that? Well, because Joab could have kept killing men. There were still men in Absalom's army. But he said, you know what? I just wanted to make sure that there was no rebellion. I cut off the head of the rebellion. We're good now. We don't need any more bloodshed. We're all Israelites here. Let's go home. So you see, for once, Joab chill out. Because he could have kept going and going and going, but he really just wanted Absalom. Verse 17, and they took Absalom and threw him into a great pit in the forest and raised over him a great heap of stones, and all Israel fled, every one to his home. So you see, these men were not loyal to Absalom completely. They knew they were defeated. They flee, right? And they throw Absalom into a mass grave. Heap of stones, which is a symbolic burial of a rebel or a traitor. So that's what that meant. If you remember back in Joshua 7, we saw this with Achan. Remember when he caused all that issue in the Battle of Ai, they lost because he stole the goods? Well, when they killed Achan, they actually threw him with a heap of stones. So you can see that traitor against Israel buried as a rebel, right? And then, of course, like I said, the rebellion has collapsed. All Israel fled, and they seem to have won. And then verse 18, now Absalom in his lifetime had taken up and set up for himself the pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. So how ironic. Absalom decides before he's even dead, he's going to set himself up his own monument. What a prideful man. I need a monument because he's all about his legacy and his ego. And you find humans today that just want their legacy and ego. And it's actually kind of it's a trick. If fundraising stuff, which I hated being a part of this stuff, but if you wanted to do it, you said, hey, we'd set up a whole memorial in your name. And if you donate, we'll rename this thing after you. You see it all the time. Go around, look up, the fields are named after, the halls are named after. You see people's legacies living on. So he's no different. He's a prideful man. But he said he had no son, which seems like a lie at first, because in 2 Samuel 14, we learned, remember, he had 3 sons and a beautiful daughter named Tamar. Remember, he named after his sister. So possibly his sons died young, which was possible back then. Or they died later on, and at some point his men were killed. Maybe his sons were in that battle, we don't know. But his 3 sons must have died, right? So he did have, at some point, they had died. And actually before this, because when he built the monument, he had no sons. And it was a way of him writing his own history. But in the end, it does become a legacy, because they keep it. But it's more to remember what Absalom did. So the Absalom's monument works, but in all the wrong ways. It's like, don't forget what Absalom did. He betrayed, his pride got messed up, and he ended up dead in a mass grave with rocks over top of him. So they keep the monument for a reason, but it's not what Absalom wanted it to be. His legacy is very tarnished, and he goes down in a bad way. His monument is now more the warning than a tribute. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up with the last couple verses, 19 through 33. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, let me run and carry the news to the king, that the Lord has delivered him from the hand of the enemies. So remember, Ahimaaz is always eager to bring good news. He's been one of the spies bringing news to David, and he's finally getting to bring the final news that it's over. We've won. It all worked out, right? In verse 20, Joab said, "You are not to carry news today. You may carry news another day, but today shall not carry news because the king's son is dead." Joab's not stupid. This isn't going to be a good message, man. Like, let this settle for a while. Let it relax, and then you can deliver him the news, right? Because this is not good right now. He's not going to get anything out of it, right? He's not going to get any reward, and he doesn't want him to get David's wrath. Because you get bad news, and you don't know how somebody's going to react to it, right? Especially because what David told them, and they all heard. Deal gently with Absalom. He was not dealt gently with at all. Verse 21, then Joab said to the Cushite, "Go tell the king what you have seen." So the Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. So the Cushite, probably an Ethiopian servant, is chosen instead. Why would Joab send this guy? Just told Ahimaaz not to. Well, Ahimaaz is important politically. Ahimaaz is a good faith one, and this is some Ethiopian guy. If he gets killed, whatever. If David's mad at him, who cares? But Ahimaaz, you're going to stay here for another day. You'll deliver the news when it's good and more rewarding for you. So you can see again, Joab's a manipulator, right? That's what he really meant by all this. That's why he ends up sending another guy. And the Cushite, you can see, is loyal. He bows and runs immediately. A very loyal servant here. The next two verses, 22 and 23, then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "Come what may, let me run also after the Cushite." And Joab said, "Why will you run, my son, seeing that you have no reward for the news?" There it is. "Come what may," he said, "I will run." So he said to him, "Run." Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. So Ahimaaz is determined, like, no, I've been a deliverer of news for a long time. It's not been good. I finally want to take good news to the king. I want to be there to be the one to tell him the battle is over and we've won. I deserve to do this. Joab says, "But you're not going to get rewarded. There's nothing good for you out of this." But Ahimaaz just wants to do it. But Joab's thinking all about what can I gain, right? What can I gain out of this? But he eventually gives in, and Ahimaaz beats the Cushite. Why? Because he's familiar with the terrain, right? He knows the shortcuts. It's like if you had somebody from out of town here and you said, "Hey, meet me out at the church," or whatever. They might take the long way, and you're like, "Oh no, I can take the back roads down Ross Road here and cut down here," and you still beat him. He beat him because he knew the terrain better. It even says, what do you say, he takes the plain there? Yeah, he took by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. He wasn't necessarily maybe faster than the Cushite, but he knew the shortcut. He was familiar, because the Cushite's from Ethiopia. He doesn't know the terrain. Ahimaaz knows it like the back of his hand. He's been back and forth delivering messages. So he's going to break the news first. Ahimaaz is so excited. When we get down to verse 24, now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof of the gate by the wall, and when he lifted up his eyes and looked, he saw a man running alone. So David's still between the two gates. And this battle, it had been going on for a while. So you can see David's restlessness and worries, right? It's like the mom that's like, "I told my kid to be home by 10 p.m. and it's midnight. Where are they at?" And the parent doesn't go to sleep. You all know this. If you have kids, you don't go to sleep. And you stay up, you call their phone, they're not answering. I'm going to call their friend. They might be with them, right? You can see David. That's nothing new. David went through that same issue, like, what's going on out there? I haven't heard from anybody yet. Who's winning? Is Absalom still okay? You can see it. He's standing there waiting. And the watchman sees, and he says, he called out and told the king, he told him about, he saw the man running. He said, if he is alone, there is news in his mouth. So David says, hey, usually a lone runner means there's a message here, right? There's usually a message coming through, a personalized report. It's not retreat. If it was a retreat, there'd be a lot of men running. There's one, so there's some news to report here. The watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called to the gate and said, see, another man running alone. The king said, he also brings news. This might have surprised David, because two runners means there's urgency. So if one comes, that's one thing, but two men, it's like, uh-oh, what's going on? So now David's like, what is up? Why are two men, because they're both messengers, it's not a retreat, but why are they both bringing news? Verse 27, the watchman said, I think the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. And the king said, he is a good man and comes with good news. So the watchmen, they've seen Ahimaaz before. He's been a servant. They know how he runs. They know his gait and how he walks and runs. They go, oh, I think that's Ahimaaz. And David, makes an assumption. Hey, Ahimaaz is a good man. He's been my spy this whole time. He's going to bring me some good news. I feel so good. It's Ahimaaz. He's bringing good news, but he's misreading the moment, right? Sometimes even the best messengers can bring painful truth, right? Doesn't mean if you're a good person, you're always going to have good news for the person. You have to just bring the news. So it's not always about who the messenger. That's why I say, don't shoot the messenger. Why do we say that? Messenger is trying to do the right thing, but it's going to be real bad news. This is where the term comes from, because people in their anger can mistake the messenger for the one who's responsible for the news, right? So David misreads the moment as Ahimaaz is a good guy, but sometimes godly people bring hard truth. We're about to see that here. Verse 28. Then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, "All is well." And he bowed before the king with his face to the earth and said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king." So he is so excited. There's peace, David. Peace, David. We finally won the war. And he bows in reverence. And he says, "Blessed be the Lord your God." So he even gives credit, Ahimaaz being godly, saying, "God won this war for you, David." And it sounds like a perfect military report. Like, this is great. But it's an incomplete military report, right? Verse 29, and the king said, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant, your servant, I saw a great commotion, but I do not know what it was." So David knows it's a good report, but he's like, wait a minute. I didn't hear anything about Absalom. That's why I've been waiting at the gate. I want to know how Absalom's doing, right? And the young man, he kind of gets afraid, and he wants to be in good graces, so he dodges the question. This is what politicians do, right? You ask them a question about whatever, and they give you some answer, and they didn't really answer the question, right? Or they pretend they didn't know. That's what Ahimaaz does. So he does kind of care about the wrath. He's now kind of worried. It was funny. It was fun and dandy to be there to be the first one to deliver the message until David asked the hard question, and he didn't know. I didn't know he was going to ask me questions. I was just here to deliver news. I wasn't here for to give a whole PR press release here. I was just going to tell you what I thought. And he was probably afraid of fear because he's probably thinking, Joab told me not to do this. I shouldn't have come here. David's going to kill me. Oh man, I'm an idiot. I shouldn't have ever done this. So you can see Ahimaaz is probably second guessing himself here. But the king's wise. The king said, "Turn aside and stand here." So he turned aside and said himself. He says, "Hey, there's another runner. I know why there's another runner now. He has more news. You stand over here. I'm going to get the rest of the story from this guy." So David tells him to move along. And you can see here again too. There's another reminder with the whole Ahimaaz thing. Sometimes people will give you partial truth because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But how good is that, right? Because the bad news comes no matter what anyway. You got to deliver all. If you want to be a good messenger, you have to deliver the whole message. Even the good and the bad. I know it doesn't feel good, but you just have to do it. But we see here he's going to have to get this news from this other individual. Verse 31, and behold, the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, "Good news for my lord the king, for the Lord has delivered you this day from the hand of all who rose up against you." So he brings a bold message. Cushite's like, cool, I have good news. I'm sure Joab didn't tip him off. Like, hey, this could be bad for you. Remember, he just sent him off. So the Cushite's ready. He's like, this is great news, David. All your enemies are gone. Right? So he doesn't hesitate to speak the truth. He just says it as it is. Verse 32. The king said to the Cushite, here's the question again, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" He's not going to let this go. And the Cushite answered, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man." So Cushite doesn't mention Absalom by name. He says, all your enemies be like that young man. But David knows that the young man Absalom. He knows who he's talking about. And this is a diplomatic way maybe to make it a little bit less harsh that Absalom died. But he's still saying, hey, may all your enemies die like your son Absalom did. And this is what David dreaded. This is why he waited at the gate. This is the news he never wanted to hear. And now he gets to hear it. And what happened? Look at verse 33. It's very telling. "And the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, 'Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son.'" It's one of the rawest, most emotional moments in all of Scripture. You can see he's torn apart because he didn't obviously want to fight in this war. He never wanted to fight Absalom. Absalom was picking the fight, right? And this had to happen. He didn't want him to die. He probably wanted to be a prisoner of war and somehow pray that he'd be restored, but it doesn't happen. And the Hebrew here actually shows us as he was shaking or trembling. So it wasn't he was just calling out, his body is literally shaking, almost like somebody in shock who gets news that their son is dead. They start trembling, shaking, and look, he says my son 5 different times. He can't control himself. My son, oh my son. He's like shaking. He's probably in shock. Even though he knew this is kind of coming, it's one thing to expect it and one thing to actually hear that it is true, right? So he's weeping out loud. And I love what he says here, though. It's really beautiful and prophetic, right? "Would I had died instead of you." So what do we have here? King David would rather have died than his son died. He would rather die for his son's sins than his son died for his sins. And who is David? David is our earthly representation of Christ in the good moments, right? In the good moments. That's why the Chronicles write him as a better king there. It looked a little better because he's supposed to point to Jesus. And it's exactly what Jesus did, Romans 5:8. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You can see Christ coming out through David here. I wish I could have died for you, so you didn't have to die. And it's exactly what Christ did for us in our place. So David's cry right here even is a shadow of Christ's substitutionary death on the cross for us. You can see it here, and I love that's why God writes the gospel all throughout all the books of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. But you can see it right there, and again, reminds you like, Father, forgive them. I'll take their place. And that's how that ends. David is upset, which is this whole situation. This scene is going to cause issues. We'll see in chapter 19 as we get into that later. It'll be really interesting with how everything is dealt with here then. So does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to add regarding chapter 18 and what we read here, or anything it made you think of? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Keep on reading. 2 Samuel 19, Lord willing, we'll be there next week. And until then, keep reading your Bibles, keep praying, and keep your lamps trimmed and burning. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Bible study, Trinity Burning Bible study, where we are in 2 Samuel. We're going to be in chapter 19 today, which will be really exciting, following up what happened in the last chapter. There'll be a lot to unpack here as well, a lot going on. But before we get started, I always love to do just a little bit of a miniature review here, just to get our heads back into what's going on as we lead into this chapter, because the chapters, again, always make more sense when you jump into them in this kind of preceding pattern here. So, if you remember in 2 Samuel 17, Absalom received counsel from Ahithophel, who was a wise counselor, who said that he should lead 12,000 men and take care of David for Absalom, which is probably the wise plan. We believe it would have worked. But remember, God allowed Hushai to go there. That was David's double agent. Gave him bad advice, said, hey, how about you hold off and wait a little bit? You need all your people from Dan to Beersheba, which means north to south, right? And said, you need to take time to recruit people, which is obviously buying David time. This was also, remember, an answer to David's prayer. Remember, David prayed that Ahithophel's counsel would be foiled and be terrible and that things would go wrong. And God did answer him here, because we know that Absalom listened to Hushai. One of the most important reasons he did is because, remember, he kind of buttered up Absalom and said, hey, you should be the one leading. You're all great and powerful. You're our great leader, Absalom. And does that thing where you can stroke people's egos and butter them up, and Absalom's proof of that. Then you had Jonathan and Ahimaaz. Remember, they were the sons of Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. They were also the spies for David, and we see that biblical pattern again, just like we saw in Joshua, in the story of Rahab, when she had to hide the spies. Same thing here. Jonathan and Ahimaaz got spotted. They were supposed to be discreet. They got spotted, and they hid inside a well, covered it up. The men didn't know where they were at, and then they were able to be rescued out and to deliver that message, showing that God had provisions there over them and made sure that everything was good. And then to end it, we saw that Shobi, Machir, and Barzillai brought David more provisions. We had Ziba earlier in the chapter before this, and then they bring more food. Remember how important that was, because how would you like to be out in the wilderness? How would you like to leave home without any refrigerator or any snacks that you got to take? No water or anything like that, and you're out there with a bunch of people, and you're hungry and thirsty. So what a blessing God sent these people here, these three men with provisions to make sure they're taken care of, and it shows us again how God is always taking care of us. That's why he always, Jesus even says that, don't worry, the flowers get dressed, the birds feed, and they don't store anything up. They don't have refrigerators and snack cubbies or anything like that. So it shows that God is providing for David and his men. He's overseeing everything. And then last week in chapter 18, we saw David's army was organized for battle against Absalom and his men. He put his three men, he split up his army in three basically departments here. He was showing good organization, good leadership, good administration. He's a professional at war, right? So David knows how to fight. You just can't go out there and say, hey, let's go battle. You have to have a plan. You have to have strategy. So he had those three men lead his units there. And then, of course, we saw the prophecy of David fulfilled, which many people miss, in that whole parable story where he said that son, which was actually referring to Absalom, not one of his hairs should touch the ground. That's exactly how Absalom dies. Remember, they're battling in the forest of Ephraim, which that's usually judgment and danger, and that's why the battle had to happen there. God's in control over nature. Remember, if they would have been battling in the plains, this wouldn't be able to happen the way it did, but God had it so that Absalom got stuck by his hair, the mule ran away, which that was a royal animal. It shows that his royalty is leaving him as well, and he's stuck in the tree hanging, remember, between heaven and earth, meaning he's been rejected by God in heaven, he's been rejected by men on earth, both literally he's hanging between heaven and earth, but you can look at it in a spiritual sense that way as well. He's been rejected by both heaven and earth, and he's hanging there in the balance, stuck. And remember that one servant found him and went and told Joab that, hey, I saw Absalom. And Joab flips out and says, why didn't you kill him? He said, well, didn't David say not to harm him if we got him? And Joab's so vindictive that he ended up killing him, of course, 3 javelins. And then he had 10 other men join in. So, Joab could have easily said, hey, I don't know which one of us killed him. There's a lot of people involved. This wasn't me, David. Joab's being politically clever here. And then, of course, he had the messengers went. David thought it was going to be good news. And it should have been good news, except there was some bad news that came with it. If you remember, the Cushite, the man we believe from Ethiopia, delivered the hard truth that Absalom was dead. And David basically goes into shock. The Hebrew shows that he was like trembling or shaking. And he says, Absalom, my son, about 5 different times there, showing he's completely devastated. It was what he had stayed up around the gates. He feared the message that was coming. And it indeed did come. And David was here mourning. And that is where we pick up in chapter 19. That's a really important scene here, as we're going to see as chapter 19 opens up. All right, 2 Samuel 19. We'll start going verse by verse. It was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people. For the people heard that day, the king is grieving for his son. And the people stole into the city that day as people steal in, who are ashamed when they flee in battle. The king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who have this day saved your life, and the lives of your sons and your daughters, and the lives of your wives and your concubines, because you love those who hate you, and hate those who love you. For you have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night. And this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now." Then the king arose and took his seat in the gate. And the people were all told, "Behold, the king is sitting in the gate." And all the people came before the king. Now Israel had fled every man to his own home. And all the people were arguing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies, and saved us from the hand of the Philistines, and now has fled out of the land from Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back?" And King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. "Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house, when the word of all Israel has come to the king? You are my brothers. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God, do so to me and more also, if you are not commander of my army from now on in place of Joab." And he swayed the heart of all the men of Judah as one man, so that they sent word to the king, "Return, both you and all your servants." So the king came back to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king, and to bring the king over the Jordan. And Shimei the son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Baharim, hurried to come down with the men of Judah to meet King David. And with them were 1,000 men from Benjamin. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and his 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan before the king. And they crossed the ford to bring over the king's household and to do his pleasure. And Shimei the son of Gera fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan, and said to the king, "Let not my lord hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Do not let the king take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king." Abishai the son of Zeruiah answered, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" But David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should do this day, be as an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day the king over Israel?" And the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king gave him his oath. And Mephibosheth the son of Saul came down to meet the king. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came back in safety. And when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" He answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go with the king. For your servant is lame. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I then to cry to the king?" And the king said to him, "Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided. You and Ziba shall divide the land." And Mephibosheth said to the king, "Oh, let him take it all, since my lord the king has come safely home." Now Barzillai, the Gileadite, had come down from Rogelim, and he went on with the king to the Jordan, to escort him over the Jordan. Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. He had provided the king with food while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. And the king said to Barzillai, "Come over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem." But Barzillai said to the king, "How many years have I still to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or what he drinks? Can I still listen to the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please, let your servant return, that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and my mother. But here's your servant, Kimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you." And the king answered, "Kimham shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you. And all that you desire of me, I will do for you." Then all the people went over the Jordan, and the king went over. And the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own home. The king went on to Gilgal, and Kimham went on with him. All the people of Judah, and also half the people of Israel, brought the king on his way. Then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, "Why have our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away, and brought the king and his household over the Jordan, and all David's men with him?" All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, "Because the king is our close relative. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has he given us any gift?" And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, "Well, we have 10 shares in the king, and in David also we have more than you. Why then did you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king?" But the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. And that's how the chapter ends. There's, again, a lot going on here, so we'll unpack what's all taking place here and the meaning of all of it. Let's start with the first 8 verses here, where Joab rebukes David. So verse 1 says, "It was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom." So, word of David's grief and its intensity spreads quickly throughout the kingdom, right? And his mourning isn't private. Remember last time in the chapter, it says he went up in a chamber. He basically went into a bedroom and cried to himself, my son Absalom, my son, my son. Now it's become visible and emotional, and it's out on display, right? So the people are watching their king break down, basically. And not only that, but over the enemy, they just risked their lives to defeat. It wasn't exciting going into the forest of Ephraim and battling, right, with these men. So they're seeing David mourn over his son, and now it's public. It's not private anymore. The whole nation's starting to find out. Verses 2 and 3. "So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people, for the people heard that day the king is grieving for his son. And the people stole into the city that day as people steal in who are ashamed when they flee in battle." So of course the soldiers won the battle, but their success is overshadowed by David's pain that they see here, which it shows how a leader's emotions, should be kept in check, especially in public at least, and how it could damage morale, right? So the people felt guilty for winning instead of gratitude. You'd think if you went out and won this battle, Absalom was ready to kill. It's reminiscent again of when Saul died. David was upset about Saul, but not like he is with Absalom. But you go out and you fight, thinking you're defending the king, and you're defending the nation, and you're taking out Absalom, all to feel guilty for it. You'd think you'd say, "Hey, thank you guys for saving my life. You guys did a great job winning that battle," but you don't hear anything like that from David. He's just upset about his son dying. So they start to feel guilty. So instead of celebration, which you usually have after a battle, there's silence and shame. It says they, as people steal in who are ashamed when they flee in battle, like they kind of have their tails be tucked between their legs, like kind of ashamed they even were out there in the battle. So things are very reverse, right, than they should be. So this, again, it shows how David's reaction reversed the mood of the nation. What should have been a happy day is really a sad day. And their boldness in battle, what should have been praised, is now an embarrassment when they brought peace. So it's really confusing for the men, and Joab knows it. So verse 4 says, the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." And again, this is the same kind of thing we heard to end the last chapter. So he's still probably in a state of shock. Like, it's not easy to just turn off your emotions that your son was just killed. Not only that, he was the next one in line to be the king, right? And Amnon, he already had a son, Amnon, who was supposed to be the king next, that he died, and now Absalom died, and David's in shambles, and I know deep down he knows it's his own fault for what he did, with Uriah and Bathsheba. So he knows he's paying the penalty for this. But it also shows that you can see a sincere love for Absalom. Even though he was at war with him, he didn't ever really hold it against Absalom so much, as he still always loved him, right? A father still loves their son no matter what. You can kind of see that here. But again, we're seeing that there's an important balance you need in leadership, right? You need to know when you can be emotional, but when you need to yield to your responsibilities, right? You can't be out here weeping and crying for the man they just killed, and it throws everybody off, right? People need hopeful leadership, and this is not very hopeful. They just want a battle, and they're all kind of confused now. So Joab jumps in to rebuke the king here, verse 5. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "You have today covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who have this day saved your life, and the lives of your sons, and your daughters, and the lives of your wives and your concubines." So Joab, he doesn't even hesitate. I love, he walks in and he's furious. Now remember, him and his brother Abishai are they're kind of fiery guys, right? They want to kill, they want to fight, they're aggressive, and Joab's sick of it. He was just out in battle. He just killed Absalom. It was after, how many murders has Joab committed? I don't even know now. It's up there. I'd have to look at it. But he's killed him, and he comes back thinking they're going to get a reward for winning. And he sees David and how David's acting, and now he knows his men. And remember, Joab's the general. Now he knows his soldiers are ashamed of themselves. And Joab's upset about this. Says, "You guys were valiant men. Why are you ashamed of yourself? This is crazy." So Joab basically tells David he's being selfish. Like, David, you're being selfish right now. You care all about yourself. You don't care about these men who are just out fighting for you, right? David's bringing shame on the people who risk their lives to protect him and his family. He points that out. We'll see there. And that's the irony that David is mourning the enemy, right, instead of the protectors. So verse number 6 continues on. It says, "Because you love those who hate you and hate those who love you." Those are strong words. "For you have made it clear today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased." Now we don't know if that's true, right? We don't know, and he probably would be happy if Absalom were alive, but he's making a really bold statement here to get David's attention. Like, hey, you want us to all go back? You want us to die and Absalom to win this whole war and take over? Would you be happy if Absalom were still king? Would that be what made you happy, David? You could see he's really fired up and probably really giving it to David, as David's still somber and in tears, right? He's letting him know this is not appreciated, David. We're not really appreciating how you're acting right now. So he's really kind of pointing out how irrational this is to David. He's kind of giving him a wake-up call, kind of like slapping him in the cheeks, like, "Wake up, David. Look what you're doing. Look how you're acting. You're acting spoiled. You're acting selfish. Look what all these men did for you." Verse 7, "Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night. And this will be worse for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now." Another strong statement. Think about what David's been through up until this point, right? He started out having to fight lions and bears and stuff off of sheep. That probably wasn't easy. That wasn't fun. Then he had to fight Goliath. That wasn't good. Then Saul wanted to kill him, right? Chased him around, right? And then his sons have died. Amnon's died. Absalom killed him. He's all upset about turmoil in his family. And Joab says, "You haven't seen nothing yet, David. You have not seen anything compared to what will come if you don't get this under control right now." And for all we know, and I'm guessing, he doesn't say this, I'm guessing Joab might have been the one to lead the revolt. If he didn't do this, Joab might have taken things into his hands being so mad. Although it doesn't say that. So he basically gives him an ultimatum. Either step up, be a leader, wipe your tears away, act like a man, or lose the fight yourself, David. And it's going to be worse than it ever has been before. Worse than all the evil David has experienced. And ironically, though, as you know, Joab comes over a little hot under the collar here, like, well, I don't know if I'd approach it like this with the king. But it's exactly what David needed, I think. It's a firm pushback into leadership. He got kind of like slapped in the face a little bit, spiritually here. Like, get back up here. And it shows that sometimes a true friend needs to speak uncomfortable truths to wake us up spiritually, right? A good friend isn't just going to say, oh, well, maybe you should stop sinning, and maybe, did you think about this? Sometimes you got to say, hey, listen, you're out of line. You know what the Bible says. I don't know why you're acting like this, especially when it's affecting other people, right? And this is affecting other people, too. It's like, you're hurting other people. You need to wake up, right? Sometimes we need that from ourselves, right? Sometimes even Jade, my wife, has to put me in my place, like, Eric, quit acting ridiculous, right? Like, oh, that's right, thank you, I needed that. Because otherwise, sometimes you don't come to your own senses, right? So a good friend will sort of speak uncomfortable truths. That's what we're seeing here from Joab. Looks a little fierce, but it's exactly what David needed, because look what verse 8 says. Then the king arose and took his seat in the gate, and the people were all told, behold, the king is sitting in the gate, and all the people came before the king. So David finally rises and takes his seat in the gate, which again is a public place of leadership and justice. So he's back there showing himself to be the king. What's really interesting is you don't hear David say, we don't have any verses that say David says, you know what, Joab, you're right. I'm really sorry for all this. I need to get my act together. He might not have said anything at all. He might have just looked at Joab, known he was right, not even said anything because he's just so torn, stood up, walked out, and just sat at the gate. Like, all right, I'll be the king. I know I need to be. I don't feel like being the king, but I'm going to be the king. I'm going to put on a face, and I'll do it. But he doesn't even say anything back to Joab. Maybe David's embarrassed. Maybe he knows Joab's right, or he would have sat there and kept crying, right? But he doesn't. He goes out there. And it also shows because it reassures the nation. The nation notices, hey, look, the king's sitting at the gate. Now the nation sees, okay, David's over his crying, and he's out here, he's going to be our leader again. So it shows that sometimes leadership is just about showing up. Sometimes it really is. Sometimes it doesn't take more than just showing up and being present. It can inspire and encourage people, right? Especially when they're hurting. So David didn't say anything. He didn't come out and give a great speech like, men of Israel and Judah, I'm back as your... You don't see anything. He just sits there. And his presence is enough to turn their frowns upside down. They don't feel as ashamed anymore because their leader is showing up. We'll finish verse 8 and then go into 9. There's a part of 8 I left out here. Now Israel had fled every man to his own home. And all the people were arguing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines. And now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. So it's interesting, remember, the men of Israel, they're the ones that followed Absalom. That's why it says they had fled every man to his own home. They took off, remember? When Absalom got killed, they took off, headed for the hills, because things have been reversed, right? David's men were taking control, and they were rebelling against David and his men. What's interesting, you see this argument break out between them. They're not so quick this time, though. They're not so quick to say, you know what? Yeah, let's make David king. Let's fix everything, and we're going to follow David. They have a bit of an argument. On one hand, they remember David's greatness, and like, well, remember, he defeated the Philistines. He defeated Goliath. He's done a lot of great things. He's won a lot of wars for us. But on the other hand, he also ran when Absalom took over. He kind of abandoned us. It's probably how some people are saying it. Didn't David abandon us and just take off instead of fighting Absalom here? And he let Absalom be in charge? And they did also anoint Absalom, so they're struggling with this. What do? We also abandoned David. We also anointed Absalom. What do we do here, right? It seems that they only want David now as king, now that Absalom's gone. They wouldn't have had these conversations, I don't think, if Absalom were still around. Which, by the way, is how Christians can be sometimes. Sometimes we only want King Jesus after our way fails. That can happen, right? People, you try your own way and then it fails, and you're like, you know what? I need Jesus now. Now I need Jesus because my way didn't work out so well. And that's kind of how they're acting here. But it's a really big moment of national confusion. So even after the enemy is defeated, a nation can still struggle with unity and direction. You can still win a war and have your nation still not unified, right? And still arguing and bickering, which happens in our country too. Verse number 10. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? So they reflect again. They had anointed Absalom, who's now dead, but why aren't we bringing David back as king? So it shows, again, a change of heart, but also a hesitancy. And maybe they're also hesitant because of fear. Because David could come back and rightfully chop their heads off, probably. And it wouldn't be out of question, because they rebelled against him. He could come back if he wants to, and he's angry, and he could take them out. So they're not sure. So it also shows, how far they've drifted, right? How their relationships have really been strained and broken in the nation of Israel, that they're still unsure of how to handle this whole situation. But they do call for the king to come back. So verse 11 then kind of pivots here and says, and King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house when the word of all Israel has come to the king? So David gets word that Israel says, you know what, we want you to be our king. Come on back, David. We've decided, we talked about it. You need to be our king. And David's like, I haven't heard anything from Judah yet. And that's my people. Judah's my tribe. Why aren't they talking about bringing me back as king? Why are they silent? I haven't got any messages from them yet, right? So he sends the priests to the elders of Judah, his own tribe, and reminds them, hey, you guys are behind the men of Israel. The 10 tribes up north, they've already talked about it. They want David to come back. Why aren't you guys saying anything? Why aren't you guys doing anything, right? And this is diplomacy. David didn't go to them. He sent Zadok and Abiathar. And I think David is, you kind of see, again, David's, in a way, now there's a lot of negative about him, but in the positives, you can see God, right? And you see Christ and his heart come out through him. So notice David's not just showing up and coming back to Jerusalem with his people, which he probably could have. He could have brought his servant and said, we're going back to Jerusalem. Nope. He's not coming back unless they invite him back, right? That's just like it is with us. Jesus doesn't force himself. Like, why isn't everybody in the world saved right now? Jesus died for all their sins. Why? Well, he's not forcing them to repent. He's not going to force them. You have to invite the Lord into your life. You have to invite the Holy Spirit into your life, right? You have to ask him to come in. It's the same here. David's showing that. I'm not just going to show up and force my way upon you. You need to want it, right? And it's also like, God goes and kind of prompts us, like, hey, guys, why aren't you repented? I died for your sins. Why don't you come to me? It says that God is after the lost, just like David is here. Like, hey, Judah, don't you want to ask me to come back? Don't you want me to be your king? So he's kind of prompting them. He's not going to force anything. It's diplomatic here. I got a good one here. All right, so verse number 12, he says, you are my brothers. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? So he appeals now to their family ties. You're my brothers. You're my bone and my flesh. You should have been the first ones to welcome me back, guys. And because they're the closest ones to him. And he's starting to bring up this language probably to remind them, their family, hey, I'm not going to hurt you. Why would Judah be hesitant when they're his own people? Well, they didn't go with him. They followed Absalom. If they would have been with him, they would have went and followed him into the wilderness. But they stayed and had Absalom anointed king. So Judah is probably a little bit ashamed. That's why it's, like if you did something wrong and your parents find out, you're not really eager to go talk to them about it, right? They kind of say, hey, is there anything you want to tell me, right? Same kind of thing here. And they're probably ashamed that David could turn on them and have them all slaughtered and taken care of, right? So he appeals, calling them this family. He's using those ties there to bring them back together. And the church is kind of like the church. The church, too, can fall into internal disputes after what I call a spiritual storm. And healing will take intentionality. If you're not intentional about healing after these wars, can even happen in a body of believers, it will remain a fracture. It does take some intention, some apologies, some, reconciliation here. So you're seeing that again. You're also seeing 1 Corinthians 1:10. I appeal to you. Remember, it says that all of you agree, and there are to be no divisions among you. Right. So you can see David even acted before this was ever written, before Paul ever wrote that. He's enacting the spiritual concept here. But restoration requires initiative on both parties. By the way, remember, not just one party, both parties, because that's partial restoration. If you don't. All right. Let's go to verse 13 here, and say to Amasa. Continues on, are you not my bone and my flesh? Now he's using family language with him. God, do so to me and more also, if you are not commander of my army from now on in place of Joab. So remember, Amasa is one of his relatives. It's David's sister's son. So it is a relative of his. So he's going to play to Amasa. But now David, again, is going to go into political genius mode. He's a political genius. Why do I say that? Well, remember who Amasa is. He was just leading Absalom's army. In that war in the forest of Ephraim, it was Absalom and Amasa versus David's men and Joab, right? Amasa is the counterpart of Joab, right? Which is why he says, I'm going to make you the commander of my army. Joab's getting fired, right? Which, here, that's powerful. David's finally sick of Joab. He fires him on the job. Why? Well, because he's been giving him orders all along, and Joab's been really fierce. And one of the last things he ever told Joab before he left says, deal with my son gently. Be gentle with him. And what did Joab do? He disobeyed the orders, right? It'd be like the general of the army not listening to the president. The president says, hey, I want you to do this. And he says, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to take care of this how I want to take care of it, right? You're liable to get fired on the job. Just because you're the general, just because you're the leader, doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. If you got these commands and directives, you don't follow it, you get fired. So David fires Joab on the spot, which, of course, is going to make Joab mad. And now Amasa is going to be his leader. But why is this political genius? Because now it's going to win over all those men that fought under Amasa that are still around, those men of Israel that fled. They're like, well, that's our leader, that's our general. He'll be our general still. And it's kind of that bridge. right? He's going to go befriend his enemies. And if he wins over Amasa, he wins over the men of Absalom. He's going to bring more unity in the nation by appealing to Absalom's people, right? That's how you unify. He's not going to keep them distant. It's another form of restoration. David's a political genius, right? It's also an example of forgiveness, right? It's kind of like Jesus. I know you did all these things against me, but I will work with you. I will work in your life, right? So David is showing us that there. Verse 14, and he swayed the heart of all the men of Judah as one man, so that they sent word to the king, return, both you and all your servants. So David's approach wins their hearts. It says they acted as one man. Judah agrees, right? Oh, you know what? We should do this. Return, both you and all your servants. And they welcome him back, right? So this reconciliation, this strategy produced unity. It worked. He's a political genius, right? Verse 15, so the king came back to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring the king over the Jordan. Remember, the Jordan is always a place of transition. Now we're going to transition back into restoration and return. When he crossed the Jordan before, it was showing division, that he was fleeing. There's a new king in the nation of Israel. Now there's going to be a restoration and return, and they're even going to escort him across. It's kind of almost like a ceremony for the king, rolling out the red carpet and bringing the king back. Of course, David could have just crossed the Jordan with his servants, but there's a whole process to show we are with you in this. Come on back, king, right? So they're bringing him back. Verse 16 now continues on. And Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Baharim, hurried to come down with the men of Judah to meet King David. Huh. Anybody remember who Shimei is? Remember this guy? The guy that threw stones and was cursing David from the hills and throwing dust and rocks and saying, curse you, you man of blood. But now he's not so brave. Not only that, he's saying, hey, you know what? He's bowing to David. Hey, I'm really sorry about that. Forgive me. I don't know what I was doing. I was a fool. Forgive me. Take me back, David. I didn't mean anything. I didn't mean anything about it. Now, the funny thing is, if David didn't ever come back, he'd probably still be cursing David. It's funny how the tides turn. All of a sudden, David has power, and all of a sudden, Shimei is a fan of David's. He knows why. He's rushing to make peace because it would have been good, right? So he's doing this to publicly reconcile it. I'm publicly coming out here and repenting, right? It looks like us though. It's sinners like, I'm going to say it in public. I was wrong. I'm not going to hide. Say, hey, David, can we have a word for a second? He drops right down in front of everybody. David, I am sorry. So he's publicly repenting here. And it says in verse 17, and with him were 1,000 men from Benjamin, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons and his 20 servants, rushed down the Jordan before the king. So you can see here that even Ziba is here now. Ziba, remember, he's the one that was put in charge of the land to take care of Mephibosheth. He lied about Mephibosheth, said, hey, Mephibosheth tried to betray you, which we don't see any evidence of that actually being the case. And remember David, he brought all that food to David, and David in his stress said, yep, cool, you can have all of Mephibosheth's land, whatever. Well, now Ziba's here, front and center. Why? Political. These guys are all political. A lot of these people are not loyal. They're just trying to do things for their own gain. Ziba wants to make sure he's in good graces of David still. Not only that, he probably wants to get to him before Mephibosheth can correct his story. Like, hey, remember, I protect you because Mephibosheth is going to turn on you. Remember that, David. And I'm still here. I'm still one of your guys out here. So he kind of runs to the front here to make sure David knows that he's still loyal. I'm still loyal to you, David, right? And he brings all of his servants there who are supposed to be working the land with him to show that he has a strong allegiance. Verse 18, and they crossed the ford to bring over the king's household and do his pleasure. And Shimei the son of Gera fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. So there he is, again, falling down, showing that humility, that he was wrong. In 19 and 20 it says, and he said to the king, let not my lord hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on that day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Do not let the king take it to heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king. Again, saying, I have sinned. Don't hold a grudge, David. I'm the first one to come to reconcile. I want to let you know I'm really sorry about all this stuff. And it continues on here. Verse 21. Abishai, he comes up again. That's Joab's brother. The son of Zeruiah answered, shall not Shimei be put to death for this? Because he cursed the Lord's anointed? Abishai, she's thinking, remember, he was the one last time when Shimei is throwing rocks at him. Remember, Abishai goes, let me go cut his head off, David. I'm going to go cut his head off right now. He can't say that. David's like, oh, no. Chill, let him go. If God wants him to do that, let him do it. So Abishai's like, oh, this is the moment. I get to go kill him finally. David, let me kill him. He's admitting to the sin. He's reminding us of what he did. Let me kill him this time. He deserves it. And you're the king now. You have the power to do this, right? So, again, it shows the danger. Abishai has zeal for the Lord and zeal for justice, but never any mercy, right? And we're supposed to have a balance between justice and mercy. That's the struggle as a Christian. You bring justice, but you also have to give mercy. He doesn't want to give any mercy. He's the kind of people that says they all should go to hell. They're sinners who go to hell. Not like, well, can we at least share the message and see if they repent first, right? It's like he's those kind of fire and brimstone. Send them where they need to go. And look how David responds. But David said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should do this day? You should this day be as an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel? Like, don't remind me what I can do, Abishai. I know what I can do. I'm sick of your guys' aggressive, hateful, always wanting to kill, always wanting to fight. I'm sick of it, guys. I'm in king, and nobody's dying today on my watch, right? David's basically saying, this is a day of restoration, not retaliation. We're not retaliating on all of our enemies today. I'm here to restore the land, Abishai. This is why I'm in charge and not you. Basically, what's saying. And David is choosing the higher road. Abishai's not wrong. He does have the right to chop everybody's heads off, kill all of his enemies because they betrayed him. But David, again, showing the heart of Christ, chooses peace over vengeance, right? He's choosing peace over vengeance and allowing them to repent, just like the Lord does with us. And the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king gave him his oath. So he makes it official with an oath. He's definitely not going to kill him, so Shimei can relax, right? Like the Lord says, you're not going to be banished to hell. I'm going to give you eternal life because you repented, right? You can be certain of that. Same thing here. And remember, James 2:13 says, mercy triumphs over judgment. You can see that right here. True strength isn't found in how harshly we punish people, but how graciously we restore people when they truly repent, right? Verse 24, and Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came back in safety. So this shows that he was deeply mourning. This goes against what Ziba said. If Mephibosheth were really trying to take over, he would have had been trimmed up beard, he would have been looking nice, but he's disheveled because it shows that he's just a wreck, because he doesn't know where David's at. David's not back, and he was full of sorrow there and loyalty to David. Verse 25 says, and when he came to Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? Remember, David was told that Mephibosheth had turned on him, and David is curious. Why didn't you ever come, Mephibosheth? I'm wondering, why didn't you come over? I would have welcomed you. Why didn't you ever show up? David wants clarity, right? He's finally going to hear the other side of the story. Probably should have thought of that before he gave, Ziba all the land, but he didn't, because he was in dire straits at the time. But verse 26, here's Mephibosheth's answer. He answered, my lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said to him, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go with the king, for your servant is lame. So he explains, like, David, I'm disabled. I wasn't able to. He said he was going to go get this thing for me. He never came back, never gave me a sheet, and he just kind of took off without me. I had nowhere to go. I can't walk around here. That's why he's my servant. That's why he helps me. He abandoned me, and not only that, he slandered me. Right? So he says, like, I was taking advantage of David. I didn't ever intend to stay back. Verse 27, he has slandered your servant, my lord the king. My lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. So he's saying, that you're the angel of God. This is honor and surrender. He's saying, David, I know I trust in you. You're a wise man. I love you. I'm loyal to you. And I just trust that you'll do the right thing. I have trust in how you'll handle all the story. Remember, this is a reminder to not judge only by one side of the story. Proverbs 18:17 says that the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. And you're seeing that here. Ziba's story was not completely true, what David heard in the wilderness. There was more to the story. And David acted quickly. Verse 28, for all my father's house were but men doomed to death before my lord the king. But you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I then to cry to the king? I love what Mephibosheth says here. Honestly, David, you could have killed me a long time ago. My dad's Jonathan, who's Saul's son, and you actually could have killed me and all my family. But you didn't. I owe you gratitude still. So he didn't look entitled. He didn't say, yeah, David, where's my land? Ziba took all my land. You got to give me all my land back. He's saying, hey, I'm just grateful to be alive. You let me eat at your table, David. I'm just honestly thankful. I'm so undeserving of this honor, but I'm really grateful for it, right? And it shows he's more worried about his relationship than his material rewards, right? Which is important. Verse 29, and the king said to him, why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided you and Ziba shall divide the land. Like, wait, what, David? This one is baffling. David, what do you mean divide the land? It was Mephibosheth's land, and you gave it all of it to Ziba, and now you're going to split it down the middle. What kind of shows human limitation and judgment. Have you ever had, I worked in the school system, and, I wasn't there for something that happened, and two kids come up to me. He punched me, he did this. Well, you didn't see. He threw this at me first. And I wasn't there. I don't know. Who do I know who's right? So David's probably like, listen, I wasn't there for this. I don't know who's right. We're splitting it down the middle. You'll both get the land. That's how we're going to deal with it because I don't want to get any more of this. I'm so sick of this argument, right? You've heard that before. Your kids are arguing. He did this. No, he did this. Like, I'm sick of hearing about it. Here's my order. Don't, shut up. I don't want to hear any more about it, right? He is sick of this whole he said, she said, I had the land. He was going to betray you. So David just, at this point, he is so exhausted. Don't forget, he's mourning his son. This is the last thing he wants to do is settle all this dispute of land right now. And he's just trying to come back and restore the nation, right? But it can be hard to decipher truth and justice when you weren't there for the whole thing. So you also see that David doesn't want to make a hasty decision either way. And Mephibosheth said to the king, oh, let him take it all, since my lord the king has come safely home. So he shows David is his reward. This shows how Mephibosheth wasn't a material guy. He's like, I don't need any land, David. Again, like I just said, I could have been killed. You're generous enough to not have killed me. So again, he doesn't worry about material blessing. It shows that he has a good, true heart. And Mephibosheth's probably the one telling the truth. But he doesn't care about the land at all. Verse 31. Now Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim, and he went on with the king of the Jordan to escort him over the Jordan. Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. He had provided the king with food while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. So Barzillai was the one that the last chapter helped bring all that food with the other three men. Remember? Those three guys that brought it. He was one of them. He's a wealthy man. He was an old guy. He couldn't fight, but he used his wealth. He's the Christians that are wealthy, that God provided wealth, that are silent, generous supporters of God's work, and it's exactly what godly leaders need sometimes, right? He needed those provisions, so Barzillai helps not in war, but he uses what God gave him, his resources, to help the men of God. And it says, and the king said to Barzillai, come over with me, and I will provide for you with me in Jerusalem. So David knows, it shows that David wants to reward his loyal friends. He knows Barzillai was loyal. He says, you know what, come with me. You're going to live in Jerusalem with me too. You've been really great to me, Barzillai. Even at your old age, you didn't have to share all your wealth, but you did. That was really honorable. Come live with me. But look what Barzillai says in the next two verses. But Barzillai said to the king, how many years have I still to live that I should go up with the king of Jerusalem? I am this day 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant, what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or what he drinks? Okay, he still isn't a singing man. Basically saying, hey, I'm old. I can't even really enjoy life much anymore. My senses are starting to go. I don't know how many more years I have left. It would kind of be wasted to honor me, right? He's saying, thanks, but no thanks. I appreciate it, David, but really, really unnecessary. And he has a better request. Look what he says. Verse 36, your servant will go a little way over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king repay me with such rewards? Like, hey, I'm still going to escort you over here, but I don't need to go all the way back to Jerusalem. I'm just doing this to show you that I still am your friend. I'm loyal to you, and I appreciate that you're back. Verse 37, please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. But here's your servant Kimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you. So Barzillai doesn't bow out and say, thanks, but no thanks. He says, hey, I can't, but you know who can? My son, Kimham. We believe it's his son. Like, my son will go with you. So he's preparing the next generation to carry on the faithfulness to David. Like, hey, I can't. I'm going to die soon. My son, he'll be faithful to you. You take him back to Jerusalem, he'll be like me being there. My son will show loyalty to you. And the king answered, Kimham shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you. And all that you desire of me, I will do. So the favor is passed through the relationship, right? David says, you know what? I'll take your son, Kimham. Come on, bring him over. And it shows that, loyalty to God's people can result in generational blessing. Generations, if you do that, your fruit can survive long after you're gone, right? Barzillai and his loyalty is going to survive long after he's gone through his son, Kimham. Verse 39, then all the people went over the Jordan, and the king went over, and the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own home. So he lets Barzillai go, and they crossed over the Jordan. Then verse 40, the king went on to Gilgal, and Kimham went on with him. All the people of Judah, and also half the people of Israel, brought the king on his way. So they have this kind of little ceremony, and the men of Judah bring him over in this kind of kingly ceremony across the Jordan. But look what happens, because of the last three verses. Verse 41, then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why have our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household over the Jordan and all David's men with him? The northern tribes feel left out. Hey, there was a kingly ceremony bringing on the Jordan. You didn't even ask us. We're the ones that brought it up. Why is Judah? Why do they get to bring the king over? It kind of reminds me of like how kids argue. Why can I be the one to do this? Why do they get to do that? Is it really important? The king's back. The king's back. Is it really important who brings across the river? But it is an honorable ceremony. And they kind of feel gypped. They're offended. Verse 42. I love Judah's ready to respond. All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, well, because the king's our close relative. Why then are you angry in this matter? Basically saying, like, have we eaten at all the king's expense? Or has he given us a gift? He has any gifts? He's like, we're family. We didn't get any reward for this. It's not like he gave us a bunch of gifts and a bunch of food. We didn't get anything special. We're just here walking him across the river. What's your problem? We're his family. We have the right. You guys have less of a right than we because we're family. He already told us we're flesh and blood. That's why we're here. We didn't get any perks from this. We're just doing it out of honor. And verse 43, how it ends. And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, well, we have 10 shares in the king. And in David also, we have more than you. Why then did you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. So you see the spat going back. They respond, well, you think you're family? We're 10 tribes of Israel. We have more tribes than you guys do. We're family too. And they're like bickering back and forth. And they're trying to say, well, we're like superior if you're counting numbers. We have more family members than you guys do. And that you can see pride and rivalry beginning to fester again. David's here trying to bring restoration, bring the nation together, and this chapter is going to end with a dispute. Because it says that Judah's words were fiercer. It doesn't say, but it sounds like the argument continued on, and they kept getting angry. And you know how it is with arguments. If they're not a peaceful word, it only gets more intense. It only increases the level of hostility. And offense, when you get offended, that only breeds division. That never brings people together. So Israel's offended. Now they're mad at the tribes of Judah. Judah's offended that Israel's even mad about this. I think it's stupid you're even arguing. We're just crossing over the Jordan River, right? And you can also see the danger of first rights thinking. Like, we have right to do this. It's a dangerous way to think, right? Everybody should be equal. We shouldn't be arguing over who has more of what and this. It's stupid, it's prideful, and it's shameful, right? And we also learn here that how fierce words can fracture fellowship. The whole point of all this whole ceremony was to bring the place together. And you see that happen sometimes, just to bring the people together. Think about holidays for some families. Luckily, most of our families are blessed that we're Christian. Some families, you bring the holiday to enjoy things, and they get in fights right out the gate. And you have to right out the gate, hey, you're not going to bring up this political issue. You're not going to do this because we just want to get through the dinner in peace. Right? That happens because fierce words can fracture fellowship. If you want to have a good time, you got to get along. You can't just argue and bicker about who has what and who's right and who's wrong. And it causes all these issues. And if you know anything about what's to come in the next chapter and the chapters to come in the book of Kings, you're going to see that this is only the beginning. This is never really restored. This argument between Israel and Judah is going to fester. You don't see it healed here. And that's kind of what takes place. And that's how that chapter ends. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we close about chapter 19 or anything that came to your mind? Yeah, Dave.
I think David had every right to warn Absalom. That was just
sure.
He had that right, but I think throughout his entire leadership, he's messed up a lot.
Yes.
In this case, he should have went out after the battle, said, listen, I'm going back to Israel.
Yep.
Handled Joab privately.
Yep.
Dismiss him, get rid of whatever, and then send some type of delegation or invite Judah back together with peace along the way instead of in the midst of hard feelings.
Right.
He messed up when he mourned in public because people didn't take that well.
Right.
But he had the right to do that. But he could have handled it differently.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Everything David here, he has the right to do. Even to put Amasa over his army and fire Joab. I think he had the right to do it. It's about how he goes about it. And shows that even good leaders with good decision can go about things the wrong way, right? David should have cried about it and said, all right, now I got to go out there and be their leader. And like you said, he should have done it quietly. Joab, come here, I got to talk to you behind closed doors. But he doesn't. Joab doesn't. We don't see Joab get word of this. He's just going to go back to him. Hey, Joab, you just got fired in front of everybody, in front of Judah. Amasa's in charge. Yeah, that went really well, right? You see how Joab would have felt. So David, again, not a perfect leader, which is why we need Jesus, because there is no perfect king. Even the man after God's own heart is failing over and over again about how he handled it. I do agree. He had the right. That's your own son. You have the right to mourn him. You have the right to fire Joab, but there's ways to do things, right, and how to handle them. And he did fail as a leader in many different ways. Paul, you had something.
Yeah, no, that last thing that you were talking about, the men of Israel,
Yeah.
the men of Judah, reminded me of the parable that Jesus spoke of, the workers that were hired at different hours.
Yes! That's great. That's a really great insight there. So he's reminded, remember that one parable about the men that get hired, and then a couple hours later he hires another one, and then right before the end they get hired, and they all get paid the same? Like, wait, what the heck? We were here working all day. And I mean, let's be honest, we'd be upset. Could you imagine going to work, and you're there all 8 hours, and the one guy overslept or is out fishing, and then came back, oh, last hour I'll work. Like, great, you guys all get paid evenly. we'd probably act the same way, right? But it shows God, and remember Jesus says, in that parable, like, I said how much you're going to earn. You think you're going to you think you need overtime pay now because you worked longer than them? I told you agreed to this contract, right? But it shows how these arguments, when you worry about other people and how they're getting rewarded and paid and done, what's getting done for them, it causes division. Worry about your own self. Be thankful that the king's back. They should be thankful the king's back, that it's going to be peaceful. Nobody's getting their heads chopped off, because honestly, Israel and Judah could have, all those men could have had their heads chopped off, right? They should be thankful that David is bringing peace back. But what did it do? It explodes in an argument. We should get there. We should have been there first. And it is so true, Paul. That parable that Jesus said, you can see even back here, and it happens today, right? It still happens. Where just be thankful for what you have. Be thankful for what God's done for you. Don't worry about other people. They sinned their whole lives. I've been a Christian ever since I was a little kid. They were doing drugs and alcohol and all this stuff, and they're doing this now, and they did all these evil things, and they're going to be saved? Like, worry about yourself. You should be glad you're saved. We should all go to hell, right? And you can hear Christians talk like this today. So this is a reminder in this scripture here that worry about yourself, be thankful for what God's done for you. Don't start saying you deserve more than other people, because that's also all about your own pride and selfishness, right? And that's what we're seeing here. So, well, thanks again, everybody. Make sure to read ahead. We'll be next week, Lord willing, in chapter 20 and continue on. But till then, keep your lamps trimmed and burning. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Trimmed and Burning Bible study where we are in 2 Samuel, going chapter by chapter, getting near the end of the book. We're going to be in chapter 20 today. So if you have your Bibles, you can open them up to chapter 20. And like always, we'll go ahead and review, just give a brief synopsis of what's been going on, because it will be really important what happened at the end of last chapter to understand what's going on in this next chapter, chapter 20. So remember in chapter 18, 2 chapters ago, Absalom had finally come with his army, and they were going to go to battle with David's men. Remember, David stayed at Mahanaim. He stayed at the gate, the city gate, and he split up his army with the 3 men who had run his division. So he was organizing his troops to go to battle in the forest of Ephraim. And the forest of Ephraim means it was dangerous terrain. They weren't just battling in these open plains. They were battling in dangerous terrain, which God had designed, right? God designed for all that to happen, because that's the way that the Lord got Absalom, fulfilled that one prophecy that none of his hairs would touch the earth. He got caught in a tree. His mule ran away, which means he had lost his royalty. That's the symbolism of royalty, the royal animal. It had ran away on him. He was stuck hanging in a tree. That one young man went and told Joab, hey, we got Absalom. He's stuck in a tree. Joab says, why didn't you kill him? And he says, well, because David said not to do it. We're supposed to deal with him gently, and we all heard it. Remember, the Bible says everybody heard it. It wasn't just an executive meeting, right? And Joab goes and says, I'll take care of him, and throws 3 javelins, which is pretty excessive. But you got to remember, Joab, of course, he's mad that he's rebelling against King David, but he's also, remember, has some personal rivalry. If you remember, Absalom set his field on fire to get his attention, so he still, I'm sure, remembers that in the back of his mind. That might have been what the 2nd and 3rd javelin were for. And Absalom is killed. They bury him, and they throw rocks over him so he can't be honored. We learned that he set up this pillar for himself because he was all about his own ego, and Absalom wanted to be remembered, and he is remembered, but in a bad way, right? A way to never be full of yourself and go against God's anointed, and you can see what happens there, and that's what happened there. And then, of course, David heard about Absalom's death, was in shock. Even though, his son was warring against him, he still, grieved for him, and he was in, the Hebrew says he was trembling or shaking, so the news hit him pretty hard, even though he somewhat expected. He was waiting at the gate, and he was in utter turmoil. So then, to start chapter 19, David's all in his feelings, which we can definitely understand, but his troops came back, and they were kind of embarrassed, right? They felt like they had lost the war, even though they had won the war, because of the way David was acting. And Joab, he kind of flips out on David and says, I think you'd be happier if we were all dead and Absalom were alive, that his rebellion would have worked. And he's kind of really upset about that and rebukes David. And remember, he's like, you need to be the king, or it's going to be even worse than you've ever seen in your life. It's going to be worse than the Philistines, worse than Saul, and probably Joab would have maybe led a rebellion himself had David not turned. But David doesn't say anything. Instead, we don't see any words. He doesn't give a speech. He just goes and sits at the gate, and that calms the troops. And I talked about how sometimes leaders, of just being present, can have such a big impact on those that they lead around them. That's what David does there. And then, of course, David wants to return to Jerusalem, but I said just like Jesus had us invite him into his heart, Jesus doesn't force his way into your life, or else everybody would be saved and all be Christians, right? You have to invite him, right? So the same thing here. David wanted to come back, but he wanted to be invited. Remember the tribes of Israel kind of like argued with it. They actually had like an argument. Said, I don't know, that David, he abandoned us, and we anointed Absalom, but David was a really valiant warrior, and he has defended us, and he did defeat the Philistines. So you can see this argument going on. And they finally decide, you know what, call David, he could be our king. And David gets word of this and says, why haven't I heard anything from Judah, my own tribe, right? And that's probably because they had also hung back and didn't follow David, and they're probably embarrassed or maybe even concerned what David's retribution could be. Because a king could come back and kill anybody he wanted who had turned against him, because somewhat they would have joined Absalom there. But we find out they make peace and they decide to join him, and all of them are going to welcome back. And David's working on unifying the people. Remember, he makes Amasa, who was the general of Absalom's army. He says, I'm going to fire Joab because Joab killed my son when I told him not to. He's fired. Amasa, you're hired. You're going to be my general now. And that was to do political unification, to help unify the nation, because if not, Amasa, could have kind of still worked for Absalom, been bitter about everything. So that was his way to kind of shake hands with the other side and make peace. So David's trying to unify the nation like a good king here. And then at the end, we even saw where, Shimei, the one who threw rocks and stuff, apologized, and David forgave him. And you have Abishai there again. Remember, he wanted to cut his head off back in the first time. He says, let me go kill him now. Now I'll kill him. And David says, no, he's apologizing. He's repenting. We're going to forgive him. And David's acting like Jesus here. He's acting like our true king in this respect. Not always. But here he actually forgives him for repenting, and Shimei is let go. Then we also learned about the old man at the end who had a son, Kimham. David was going to honor him for all the great things he did. And he says, no, just let my son carry on the torch for me. He'll go to Jerusalem. I'll go die in peace. Right? And it's kind of like a Christian. We can say that. Now that we know the Lord is Lord over our lives, and he is our Savior, we can die. And when we die, we'll die in peace, just like Barzillai did there. That's kind of... And then right at the end, if you remember how the chapter ended, the Israelites, the tribes of Israel, men of Israel, were arguing and saying, hey, why did you guys, Judah, get to be a part of this king ceremony, this special ceremony for the king, right? We should be there. And then Judah says, well, he's our kin. And they say, well, we have more people. We have 10 tribes. And it kept going, and it says, the last sentence I have, but the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. So fiercer means the other ones were pretty fierce too. So it's turned into a big argument. This whole chapter was designed, David was trying to bring everybody together, and it erupted by the end into a big argument. It got kind of out of hand. And that is going to play into chapter 20, what we're going to read about today. So you can open up your Bibles to chapter 20. And we'll go ahead and go verse by verse here. All right. Now there happened to be there a worthless man whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite. And he blew the trumpet and said, we have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. So all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah followed their king steadfastly from the Jordan to Jerusalem. And David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 concubines whom he had left to care for the house, and put them in a house under guard and provided for them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living as if in widowhood. Then the king said to Amasa, call the men of Judah together to me within 3 days, and be here yourself. So Amasa went to summon Judah, but he delayed beyond the set time that had been appointed him. And David said to Abishai, now Sheba the son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your lord's servants and pursue him, lest he get himself to fortified cities and escape from us. And there went out after him Joab's men, and the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and all the mighty men. They went out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. When they were at the great stone that is in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was wearing a soldier's garment, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened on his thigh. And as he went forward, it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, is it well with you, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not observe the sword that was in Joab's hand. So Joab struck him with it in the stomach and spilled his entrails to the ground without striking a second blow, and he died. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. And one of Joab's young men took his stand by Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." And Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the highway. And anyone who came by seeing him stopped. And when the man saw that all the people stopped, he carried Amasa out of the highway into the field and threw a garment over him. When he was taken out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel of Beth-Makkah, and all the Bichrites assembled and followed him in. And all the men who were with Joab came and besieged him in Abel of Beth-Makkah. They cast up a mound against the city, and it stood against the rampart, and they were battering the wall to throw it down. Then a wise woman called from the city, "Listen, listen, tell Joab, come here that I may speak to you." And he came near her, and the woman said, "Are you Joab?" He answered, "I am." Then she said to him, "Listen to the words of your servant." And he answered, "I am listening." Then she said, "They used to say in former times, 'Let them but ask counsel at Abel.' And so they settled a matter. I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord?" Joab answered, Far be it from me, far be it, that I should swallow up or destroy. That is not true. But a man of the hill country of Ephraim, called Sheba, the son of Bichri, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give up him alone, and I will withdraw from the city. And the woman said to Joab, Behold, his head shall be thrown to you over the wall. Then the woman went to all the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they dispersed from the city, every man to his home. And Joab returned to Jerusalem to the king. Now Joab was in command of all the army of Israel, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was in command of the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and Adoram was in charge of the forced labor, and Jehoshaphat the son of Ahilud was the recorder, and Sheva was secretary, and Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and Ira the Jairite was also David's priest. And that's how the chapter ends. So a lot going on there. Let's go ahead and break that down, and we'll start with just the first 8 verses as Sheba led this rebellion here. So it says, Now there happened to be there a worthless man, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite, and he blew the trumpet and said, We have no portion in David, we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse, every man to his own tents, O Israel. So Sheba here is called a worthless man, but literally if you translate it, it means a man of Belial, which could be a man of wickedness. He's not only worthless, like some worthless guy, he's wicked. He's a man of Satan, which means he had some satanic reasoning behind him, and his life was no good. He was kind of a guy that was against people and always doing the wrong thing. So he's some evil man named Sheba, right? A man of Belial. And he says, he's playing off this national division. Remember how the last chapter ended? The Israelites and the Judites were fighting with each other of who's who, and he says, you know what? I can take this division here and use it to my advantage. So he says right here, David shouldn't be our king, and look what he calls him. He says, look, David, we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. We have to understand, remember, Jesse was this lowly shepherd man, just a humble man. So with this language, he's trying to take away that king language and make it more like this humble little guy, David. He's not a king. He's just some shepherd, right? So he's kind of using this language to take away the idea that he would be king, right? We have no portion in David, and he repeats this whole thing. And this same thing is actually repeated in 1 Kings 12:16 later on, when the northern tribes split from Rehoboam. When the Jeroboam and Rehoboam happens, this exact phrase is used later. So it echoes on. So that civil war, ever since Absalom, has never really been healed. And now it's split right back open. So what David wanted to do is unify, and now it has really split open into an absolute rebellion. And this Sheba guy was the causer of it, an evil man. And Romans 16:17 even tells us to watch out for those who cause divisions. He would be one of those guys, Sheba. There are people out there that just want to cause division, want to wreck things for their own personal gain. They'll get people to divide each other so they can get what they want. And that's exactly what Sheba's doing here. So it says, all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba the son of Bichri. Now the men of Judah followed their king steadfastly from the Jordan to Jerusalem. So sadly, Israel follows them. They're convinced. Why? Well, they're mad. And what we just read at the end of the last chapter, Judah had fiercer words than they did. They were being really nasty to them. So you know what? Maybe we do want to fight Judah if they're going to be David's kinmen. Maybe we'll go. Maybe we don't need any of them anyway, right? So they listen to him. But Judah still stays loyal, and it's nice to see there's always loyal people as well. There are people that are going to rebel and go against the word of God and what God has planned. There will be those who are loyal, and Judah's going to stay loyal. And it probably doesn't help that Israel became their enemies here in this last argument. They're kind of mad at them. So they have now opposed each other, and it's turning into civil disobedience by the northern tribes, which will basically turn into civil war here in a little bit. Verse 3, and David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 concubines whom he had left to care for the house and put them in a house under guard and provided for them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up until the day of their death, living as if in widowhood. So it's kind of sad here. Those 10 concubines that we learned about that David left to keep over the palace, Absalom publicly shamed them, remember, up on the roof to shame David. And I said that was a permanent thing. That's why Ahithophel had him do it. A permanent thing. And unfortunately, it was permanent even for those concubines who were used and abused. They didn't have it. They didn't ask for this. It's really sad, but it's a reminder, a sad reminder, that although, sins can be forgiven, there's still permanent damage done from sin. And these women were kind of left as widows, kind of secluded on their own. David never treated them like he did before because Absalom had defiled them, right? So Absalom's sin and David's sin, you could say, has really caused them and wrecked their entire lives. So there are people today who their lives are wrecked because other people's sins. We know that. It's a really sad reality of everything. Moving along to verse 4. Then the king said to Amasa, call the men of Judah together to me within 3 days and be here yourself. So remember, David made Amasa the general of his army, not realizing that Amasa was going to get called right up into a battle this soon, right? This is pretty instant. He probably just thought he'd be there for a while, learn the ropes. They'd have some conversations. Well, nope, Amasa is now the leader of the army, and he's going to have to lead a battle right out the gate. And notice here, David says, in 3 days. That's pretty quickly. To get all the troops ready in 3 days pretty quickly. Why? Well, remember Absalom's whole problem? He delayed. Remember, Ahithophel said, let's go right now. Right? But Hushai made him delay. And that's why Absalom lost the war. It allowed David to recover. David knows you got to act now, right? You don't want to delay, right? We got to be bold. We got to move now. So he calls Amasa into immediate to rally the troops. Verse 5, so Amasa went to summon Judah, but he delayed beyond the set time that had been appointed to him. So Amasa fails his first job. He's on the job, the new general. It's kind of like when restaurants or places get new managers, and then the new manager is worse than the last one. It's like, oh man, this place is really going downhill. So I'm sure the troops, they probably knew that. So Amasa kind of blows it here. He delays it. And delaying is costly here. Remember, it was costly for Absalom. So he's delaying here. And he was supposed to listen to David. And we know, you should never delay. They say delayed obedience is still disobedience. So if God calls you to do something and you delay to do it, that's technically disobedience. Even if you obey, delaying the obedience, if it's supposed to be immediate, is still disobeying. That's what we see here with Amasa. He's in the wrong here. Verse 6, and David said to Abishai, now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servant to pursue him, lest he get himself to fortified cities and escape from us. So David essentially now fires Amasa. He's just firing people left and right. He's like, he can't do the job. He's going, you know what? I don't have time to wait I don't know where he went. I don't know what he's doing. Abishai, you're in charge now. And who is Abishai? Joab's brother, right? So Joab was fired. Now you got Amasa's fired. Now Abishai is going to lead this because he knows Abishai. Remember, he's fierce. Abishai is the one to cut the head off of Shimei. So Abishai is going to be ready for war. And he's the guy you can trust. He actually led one of those 3 divisions, remember? Against Absalom. So he's going to be a leader, and he doesn't want Sheba to get into a fortified city. Because that would be able, if he got into a fortified city, he could hole up and have time. He could build a full-scale civil war rebellion, right? So he doesn't want to give him time to get to a fortified city, right? And this whole thing you can learn here is like, you could show grace and leadership like David did, and it's good to have, be politically wise, but at some point if it's failing, you cut your ties. If your political move is failing, stop and turn the other direction so you can succeed. And David does that right here. He's not going to waste any time, right? And it says here in verse 7, and there went out after him Joab's men and the Kerethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men. They went out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. So Abishai is now in charge. Joab's still going to be out there, Joab's men. the Kerethites and the Pelethites, basically the royal guard, the secret service, you could call them, the secret service, like highly trained men, and the mighty men, which we learn about in a couple chapters. Remember, David had those really mighty men. So all the high-end fighters. He's sending the heavy artillery out here, and Abishai is going to lead it, right? And also the fact that it says here what Joab's men. It says that Joab, although recently demoted, still commands a big loyalty, right? Why? Well, Joab's been the leader for a long time, and he's helped lead a lot of victories, right? He's led many victories here. And Joab's very trustworthy, right? Where Amasa had just abandoned him, and Abishai's going to help lead, but even though Abishai's in charge, they still see Joab as their leader. And we still don't know, like, going back to the Amasa, some people ask, why did Amasa delay? Like, why didn't he listen right away? Well, there's a couple guesses we might have. One, maybe he was still kind of bitter that Absalom died, and he knew that this is how Absalom was defeated. Maybe, we don't know. Or a lot of people believe that he didn't have the skill set. He wasn't a very good general. Why would we say that? Well, when he was put in charge, his army got wiped out. He's 0 for 1. As far as we know, he is 0 for 1 and got obliterated. I think it said 20,000 men got destroyed. So he just might not be that great of a leader. We don't know whether he intentionally was trying to sabotage David or if he just wasn't a very good general. We don't know. But now Joab is still kind of looked at as a leader, although Abishai, his brother, is leading the troops. They're kind of all on this mission. In verse 8, it says, when they were at the great stone that is in Gibeon, look at this, look who shows up. Amasa came to meet them. Now Joab was wearing a soldier's garment, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened on his thigh. And as he went forward, it fell out. So, at Gibeon, Amasa gets word probably, they're going out to battle without me. So he shows up at Gibeon, probably out of breath. Hey guys, I'm here. I'm ready to lead, guys. We're going to go into battle. They're like, hey, forget it. You've been fired. David fired you back there. Abishai is now in charge, right? So either Amasa was messing around or purposely intended to not lead the army, and now he's going to try to join. And remember, Amasa might be a little bit, worried because who are they going to fight against? The men of Israel. And that's exactly who Amasa led. Amasa was going to have to lead an army against his own men. Maybe another reason he didn't want to lead this thing. But he shows up and acts like, hey guys, I'm here to fight. But it's too late, right? It was blown. He's not in charge. Abishai's in charge now. And now you see Joab's wearing a soldier's garment. So not a general. He's showing that he's going to be a soldier in this. He's not a leader. He's a soldier in this army, in this battle here. And he had a sword. And when he leans over, it falls out as Amasa shows up. Oh, what an accident. Do you think it was accidental? I don't. It made Joab look unarmed. So he sees Amasa, he leans over, oh, there goes my sword. Hey, Amasa, how's it going? So Amasa's like, oh, Joab, he's not even armed. He doesn't have his sword. And look what it says happens here in verse 9. And Joab said to Amasa, is it well with you, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. So this is deception cloaked in familiarity. Remember, they are family. Remember that? Because he's also a nephew of David, so they're kind of, relatives here. And he's like, hey, Amasa, my sword just dropped out. How you doing? How have you been? I haven't seen you. I haven't talked to you in a while. Come here. Let me give you a kiss. And that sounds weird to us, but back then that was a greeting. To grab somebody by the beard, they did, kind of like how the French people give the kisses on the cheeks, but I still don't do it. It's still kind of weird to me. But the Europeans do it. It's kind of like that. He kind of brings them in, and it looks very friendly. Like almost like, hey, come in for a hug. Come here. Come on, cuz. Come on in. Give me a hug, right? Because they're cousins. And he makes it look all friendly. He's like, oh, cool. Like, we're putting this thing in the past. This is great. We're friends again. This is good. We're united as a family again, right? But Psalm 55:21 kind of plays right into this. Psalm 55:21 I have here. His speech was smooth as butter, yet war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. That's in Psalms 55, by the way. So Joab uses relationship language to mask his true murderous intent for Amasa, right? And here what we have in verse 10. But Amasa did not observe the sword that was in Joab's hand. So Joab struck him with it in the stomach and spilled his entrails to the ground without striking a second blow, and he died. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. So Amasa doesn't see the sword. He thinks Joab's, he dropped the sword. Didn't see him pick it up like a magician. Like, hey, look at my hand over here, and I'm picking up my sword over here, right? And he's probably holding it in his left hand, because in the right hand is where they usually had a sword, so his hand looked empty, right? And this kind of reminds me of, if you remember Ehud, the one judge, when he kills King Eglon, he was able to trick him because he had the sword in his left hand, which wasn't used to, and he stabbed King Eglon was able to kill him that way. Very reminiscent of what had happened back then. And he says he kills him, and it spilled his entrails to the ground without striking a second blow. So he's not going to put his, he did 3 javelins with Absalom. He's just doing it once, and it was a good enough hit that his gut started spilling out, and he pretty much dies instantly, right? And he's getting revenge, right? Now, why would Joab kill him? Well, 2 reasons. One, the main one, probably jealousy. He stole my job. I should have been the general. I can't believe David made Amasa the king, or the general of this army, so I'm going to kill him, right? And he kills him there. Another one, he might be concerned also, and maybe it's double, so there's more than one reason, that Amasa was not going to be loyal to David. Why? Well, he just delayed for over 3 days. He was supposed to be, so he didn't seem like a really justifiable, reasonable leader. So he doesn't really trust them, and they're going to war against Amasa's former people. So he might not trust them, and he might kill him for that reason, but he also kills him because he is jealous, I think, is a really, really big reason. You see Joab again. Joab and Abishai are just killers. They're ruthless, right? And you see that come out again, and you can see here, it's kind of a warning to people if you're in Amasa, beware of friendly betrayal. Sometimes people can pretend to be nice to you to betray you. You can see that happen here. It's also a reminder, although this happens and it works for Joab, God's kingdom is never built on sin, and he may permit it temporarily, but he never approves of it. So I don't think God approved of this stuff ever. When people say, like, well, that's in the Bible, they did that, and it's like, it never says then God approved of it. It never said God approved of David's 10 concubines. It never said he approved of Solomon's, all of his wives. It never said he approved of Joab murdering his cousin over this, right? So it's still evil, and you shouldn't ever use sin, right? You shouldn't ever use sin to do godly things. And there are, sometimes people will use godly, they'll try to use godly purposes to justify their ungodly things, right? Well, this is the Lord's work, and we'll do all this ungodly stuff, like, well, that doesn't cut it, right? You can't do ungodly things to act godly. And let that be a reminder there. Verse 11, and one of Joab's young men took his stand by Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab, and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. So one of Joab's loyal, faithful soldiers, immediately, because it said, what did it say that last verse there? It said something to the effect of Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, so they didn't waste any time. Right after they kill him, Joab and Abishai, all right, now let's go get Sheba. He's dead, let's go. We're in charge now, right? And now you have his media, Joab's media, propaganda, right? Is this clever propaganda? Why do I say that? Well, it distracts from Joab's crime here. He just murdered a guy. It's like, hey guys, it's really important. Follow Joab. It's like, who made Joab the leader? Who did this? So it's kind of Joab's mouthpiece. It's like when the news media runs out there and says whatever the government wants them to say. That happens sometimes, right? Especially over in China. They'll just kind of say things and put things in your mind like it's the truth. So people without thinking take this propaganda from this guy and say, what does it say? Whoever favors Joab, whoever follows David, let him follow Joab. So he links Joab and David right here. Whoever favors Joab, you say, I don't know, he just killed a guy. And whoever is for David, well, I'm for King David. So now being with King David has been linked with propaganda to being with Joab, and you can't separate the two. People will do that a lot. They'll take the truth and something wrong, and they'll link it. So if you don't believe in this, and you obviously don't believe in that, right? And that happens today all the time in the media, by the way. They'll try to link things and say, you're not this nice person, and you're not gentle and loving if you don't also agree with this. And it's like, you can separate the two. But here it works, and the men decide to follow Joab. Verse 12, though. And Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the highway, and anyone who came by, seeing him, stopped. And when the man saw that all the people stopped, he carried Amasa out of the highway into the field and threw a garment over him. Literally a cover-up. That's literally a cover-up. He literally covered him up, right? Why did he do this? Well, people saw this guy. They're going to war, and they're like, stopping, like, oh, wow, Amasa's bleeding out. What happened here, right? It's a big distraction. And this mouthpiece that Joab sees, it's causing the warriors to stop from their mission and says, I got to get rid of this body. I got to get rid of this thing. They take him over, they put a blanket over, like, I got to cover this up. I don't want this to be a hindrance. I don't want this to stop anybody, because sin can cause confusion and hesitation, right? If all of a sudden you see something evil going on, it's going to make you stop, like, wow, what is going on here, right? So he removes it, so it's not a distraction anymore. And it's sad here because you never see anybody say anything. Like, hey, what happened to Amasa? Why is he bleeding out? Did Israel do this? Somebody, who killed him? So something is off, but nobody says anything out loud, and that happens a lot. It happens a lot. When people notice things are off, they don't want to say anything because they don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to make everything uncomfortable. They don't want to cause a big issue, right? That's important to us. You see something's off, something's a problem, say something. See something, say something. They put that in the schools all over the place now. That's how people get away with things. When people are too afraid. I've run into it in my last church. There's things going on that are wrong, and nobody wants to say anything because they'll be a little uncomfortable. If you see something wrong, stop and ask questions and say some things about it, right? That's what it's telling us here. And then verse 13. When he was taken out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. So out of sight, out of mind, right? The pursuit continues because he hid the sin. And people will do that. When there's sin, they will hide their sin to get people to go on. That happens all the time, right? So the people follow Joab then, not necessarily because they approve of him, but because they've grown used to the system, honestly. And even if you told them Joab killed him, like, yeah, well, Joab killed Abner, and he killed, this guy and that guy, he killed Absalom, yeah. They're almost desensitized to it anyway. Even if you would have pointed it out, sadly, this happens as well. Even if somebody would have said, hey, Joab did this isn't right, they would have said, yeah, well, he's our leader. And that happens a lot. Leaders can get away with things because they did a lot of good things in the past. And they'll say, well, yeah, but they did this, this, and this, so I'm used to this. I know they screw up here and there, but they're not perfect, right? So, but they follow Joab because they're used to the system. And even though there might have been a murder, those people, remember, those guys stopped and saw his bloody body of Amasa bleeding, but then they kept on going because whatever, it's Joab, whatever happened, right? So it's a reminder of us, don't let sin block your road, right? Your sin can stop, your mission can stop things and stop momentum. Sin can stop your own momentum, right? And also reminds us, remember the cost of silence. Somebody should have asked what was going on with Amasa and what was really going on and said, hey, no, Abishai's in charge. Joab, you're not in charge just because you kill a guy and make yourself in charge. That's not how this works because your propaganda guy said that you're in charge. That's not how this works. But nobody spoke up, and that was wrong. Now we'll go to the end of the chapter here. It gets really interesting. And Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel of Beth-Makkah, and all the Bichrites assembled and followed him. So you see, Sheba, he knows now, he's kind of on the run here. He knows they're coming for him. So he goes through all of Israel, says, pass through all the tribes. He's going there, hey, follow me. Follow me, guys, they're coming for him. We got to rally the troops. And he's probably sprinting as he knows they're coming. But he's going through all of Israel, trying to recruit for one last push in his rebellion. But notice the ones who follow him, the Bichrites, his family, that's about it. And the rest of Israel's like, well, yeah, I saw what happened to Absalom. I know how this ends. I'm not going out there. I'm not having Joab and his guys slit my throats, cut my head off and kill me, right? So he's like, you're on your own. And again, Proverbs 16:18 keeps coming to my mind. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Sheba was all real tough and brave until the army came for him. Now he's on the run, right? Right? He started loud and bold, but now he's hiding behind walls, right? And that will happen. You have people that are real arrogant and stuff until the tide gets turned. People start, hey, let's settle this. Now they're hiding, right? And that's exactly what's happening here. Verse 15 says, and all the men who were with Joab came and besieged him in Abel of Beth-Makkah. They cast up a mound against the city, and it stood against the rampart, and they were battering the wall to throw it down. So we don't have this stuff much anymore, but back then, remember, they would have to build walls around cities to protect. That's why you go into the city, you can hide, take refuge in there. That's why he goes into the city. Not to mention, Abel is known as a really peaceful and wise city. He probably thinks, if I go here, I'll be safe. This is one of the best known, best reputation cities I have. I'll hide within these walls and I'll be safe. But a common thing back then, to cast up a mound against the city, literally means they said, get some dirt, pile it up. And they were building up a rampart. They were piling it up so they could build a little sand mound here and run up right up over the wall. And the whole army could have marched right over the wall. That was common back then. So I can only imagine how long they saw it. And the people of Abel are like, uh-oh, Joab and his guys are out there. They're pretty mad. And they're getting dirt. They're getting dirt and they're stacking up. They're building a rampart. They're coming over the walls. And everybody's probably in a panic here, right? And it's interesting. It reminds me of the words, Isaiah 30, verses 12 and 13. I have them written down here. Because you despise this word and trust in oppression, this iniquity shall be to you like a breach in a high wall, bulging out and about to collapse. Isaiah wrote about that later on. So it shows you'll be found out. You can't hide from your sins. You can't hide from rebelling against God and his ways. There will always be a way. And even if you have these tall walls, even if you think you're secure and safe, God can get in anywhere. And he was sending these troops right up over the wall. So it was only a matter of time, right? And it's only a matter of time till our sins catch up to us, right? Rebellion ends in ruin, right? Sinners can hide, but God will always find out their sin. Verse 16. Then a wise woman called from the city. Listen, tell Joab, come here, that I may speak to you. So there's a wise woman now. I love this. She's not named, but a wise woman. Remember, there's a wise woman before that gave that whole parable when they're trying to convince David to get Absalom to come back. So now you have another wise woman in the same book here coming in. And I love it. Instead of panicking, she wisely calls for dialogue in the midst of this violence. Really, really wise, because the people of Abel are looking like, uh-oh. They're going to come in, and if your city's besieged, it's not good. They can come in and slaughter. A lot of times what happened, they came in and they just started killing. So, he's kind of hiding out. Kind of reminds me of what Hamas does. They go into Israel or in the Gaza, and they hide with all the people. So then all these other people end up getting killed when they go after them. Same thing here, right? And she's kind of like the wise woman of Proverbs 31. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. You can see that kind of humble but bold voice will bring peace in the middle of madness, right? She's being really humble. Hey, let's have a talk. Let's just talk this out. Really wise of her. Verse 17. And he came near her, and the woman said, "Are you Joab?" He answered, "I am." And she said to him, "Listen to the words of your servant." And he answered, "I am listening," right? And this is like the wisdom of James 3. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason. She's using her wisdom. She's a wise woman. She's using the wisdom that James writes about later on, over 1,000 years later on, he writes about that, right? So she's using spiritual wisdom and respect for Joab, which is really smart, right? She's not going to start saying, "Hey, what are you guys doing here? You don't belong here," right? She didn't get divisive. She's doing very peaceful. "Hey, Joab, let's just talk about this." Verse 18. Then she said, "They used to say in former times, 'Let them but ask counsel at Abel,' and so they settled a matter." So this is a city of counsel. This is a wise city. It's like, hey, wise decisions were made here, Joab. We're pretty wise people here. People used to say all the time to come talk to us. And now you're here. We're not rebels. We're peacemakers. We're not causing problems, right? Which again, Ecclesiastes, wisdom is better than weapons of war. You're seeing it here. Because the weapons of war wouldn't have done them any good, but wisdom does. Protects them. Verse 19, she says this, "I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord?" Isn't that interesting? It's Mother's Day and we talk about the mother in Israel. How cool is that? I didn't plan that. That's pretty awesome, God. That's pretty cool. What she's saying here is that a heritage, right? The city is a mother in Israel. She's using this language like a nurturing figure. Why would you want to kill your mother? Nobody would want to do that, right? It's like, hey, we're known in Israel as a really wise city. Everybody knows this. We're a motherly figure here. Why would you want to take over our city, Joab? What's your reason for this, right? She's being very logical, very powerful with her words, right? Why destroy the innocent to reach the guilty, Joab? We're innocent. Really, really smart here. And what does it say in verse 20? So Joab answered, "Far be it from me, far be it that I should swallow up or destroy." She gets Joab to come to his senses, I mean. I'm not here actually to kill all you guys. I'm not here for that. That's not my goal here. And it reminds us, sometimes bold confrontations bring clarification and peace. That's pretty bold of this woman to do. But it actually became clear-minded. Like, you know what? You're right. I'm not really here to kill you guys. I never really said that, right? And I love again, this woman is not named, a wise woman. It kind of reminds us, you don't have to have a name and a title and all these things. Again, we're reminded over and over in Scripture. She's not even named, but she's still remembered by God. Which means just because you don't have a fancy title, just because people don't know you for these high regards, doesn't mean you can make a big change for the Lord. This woman's going to save this entire city just with her wisdom. Look what verse 21 says. "That is not true," Joab says. "But a man of the hill country of Ephraim, called Sheba the son of Bichri, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give up him alone, and I will withdraw from the city." And the woman said to Joab, "Behold, his head shall be thrown to you over the wall." So Joab makes a very precise demand. Hey, we're not here for the city, we're here for Sheba. Hand over Sheba, and the siege ends. We're not here for you, I have one mission, and it's to get Sheba, right? So the woman says she's going to throw his head over the wall. So this is shocking, but also strategic, right? She understands that she can protect many by surrendering one guilty man, right? And this wasn't that uncommon. Like, things were brutal back in the day. She's like, we got to kill this guy because that's really what they were after. If we get rid of him, we're all safe. Pretty wise. Verse 22. Then the woman went to all the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they dispersed from the city, every man to his home, and Joab returned to Jerusalem to the king. So she doesn't even act alone. She persuades the city, hey, wherever the Sheba guy is, find the Sheba guy, go ahead and find him, and cut off his head. When you get him, round him up, we'll cut off his head, and I'm going to throw it over to Joab. Right? I know one preacher makes a joke about, what did the guy say? What did she say before she threw the head over? Heads up! I'm sure they probably weren't joking too much back then, but we can joke about it now. That's done and over with, right? But her wisdom worked. They removed the threat to save the innocent people. That actually worked, right? The wise woman literally saved her city with words, right? Her words were more wise, were better than weapons of war, just like the Bible says. Wisdom is far better than going to war physically, right? You can use wisdom to do that. And again, a reminder that one righteous person can influence many, right? You don't need to be in the spotlight, like I said. Wisdom is greatly influential when you ground it in the truth, which means, do you know, just by standing up for the truth sometimes and being that one word of wisdom, that one person that says, you know what, here's the wise thing to do. It doesn't matter if you have a title or not. You can convince a whole bunch of people to do wise things that wouldn't have otherwise, right? So you in your own life can be a voice of reason, and you can also be a witness to other people. You can encourage a bunch of other believers around you with the way you live your life out, and it can really have a real impact on a large group of people, because this one woman's words, talking to Joab, thinking this out and having up this idea, was able to save and rescue this entire city. And we still don't know what her name was. The Lord will tell us in heaven, I'm sure, but right now, God says it wasn't important to know her name. She did the right thing. That's all. It's important. You don't need a title, right? So, and it shows here, God honors those who act boldly. Why? God made sure she was written in the Bible, right? He did honor her. He didn't have to give us a name. He honors you in some way or fashion, whether it's in your life or whatever, when you do the right thing. Now here, it ends here, the last few verses with David's cabinet. You can call it like his cabinet, right? It's like a Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War, those kind of things here. What does it say? Now Joab was in command of all the army of Israel, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was in command of the Kerethites and the Pelethites. So Benaiah, remember, is a mighty warrior. He's listed later on as well. But Kerethites and Pelethites, remember, they're like the Secret Service, the Royal Guard. But notice Joab's put back in charge. I don't know how that happens, but I guess David's like, you know what, he's a good warrior, he's a good general. I'm going to put him back in charge. But later on, don't worry, it comes back around. Joab gets what he's going to get. If you haven't read 1 Kings, you'll get there. You'll find out he gets what's coming to him. But Joab's put back in charge. He gets his job back. That's kind of wild to me, but whatever. That's what David wanted. Verse 24, and Adoram was in charge of the forced labor, and Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Adoram, sometimes he's also called Adoniram in later texts, but he oversees this labor, right, which is a growing part of Israel's infrastructure, and its taxation under the monarchy. So it's okay to have the civil administration. It is necessary at times, but it always must be handled with justice and compassion to avoid burdening God's people. Why do I say that from this verse? Well, I don't say it from this verse, but in 1 Kings 12:18, let me read what it says. 1 Kings 12:18, this is when the big civil war happens, when the tribes really split. It says, then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was taskmaster over the forced labor, and all Israel stoned him to death with stones. And King Rehoboam hurried to mount his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. They didn't like him. He was a little forceful. That was one of the big problems. And later on, he'll be killed because of it. And then verses 25 and 26. And Sheba was secretary, and Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and Ira the Jairite was also David's priest. So you see, Zadok and Abiathar are still priests, but now you got this Ira. Who's that? Well, he's a new priest on this list. He's basically going to be David's personal spiritual counselor. So David says, you know, I need my own pastor. So he has his own pastor hired just for the pastor of David. Imagine that job. You're just the pastor for David. You don't worry about the other people. That's what Zadok and Abiathar are doing. You just witness. You just give the testimony to him. You teach him. You preach to him. And David's going to have his own priest there. And this also shows the reason what's this whole cabinet, that God values order after chaos. After chaos, you got to bring things back in order. That's exactly what David does. He starts putting things back in charge. Puts Joab back in charge. Starts putting people in charge of things, because David can't oversee everything. He needs a good team, right? And he needs good leadership, both practically, right, with the military, but also spiritually. I like that. It doesn't just say, and he was in charge of the army, and he was in charge of the forced labor. It doesn't stop there. It says, and then here were the priests, and David's own private priest, Ira. So it shows physical things matter, like doing the actual duties matter, but also spiritual stuff really matters, can often be forgotten. But remember that our own team matters. Even in your life, your own team matters, right? So you might not be a king, but who you surround yourself with influences your walk with the Lord, right? Just like David's did. So everybody has a team here. You have people that you're surrounded with, right? They say, you know, bad company can ruin good morals, the Bible says. So always make sure that you have people on your team that you need to have around us, right? But that is the end of chapter 20. Next week we'll go to chapter 21. Does anybody have anything they want to say or add to that before we close? Yeah, Dave.
This Sheba, is that perhaps a descendant of Sheba the nation?
The queen.
And also a descendant of Ham?
That's
the mountains of the north?
That's a great question. I'm not sure about Ham. I think Sheba might be different, but we're not positive, because that happens later on the Queen of Sheba comes up. We believe they're actually separate, but the descendants of Ham, I'd have to check on, because it could be very, very possible, especially with that wickedness, when it says a man of Belial in Hebrew, meaning like it wasn't just some worthless guy, he was a satanic guy, which could very well be. I'd have to go back through and trace his lineage. I'm sure you can actually find it, but I'm not sure, because remember, there is a different Queen of Sheba comes to see Solomon's wisdom, because you hear about this wise guy, and then Sheba comes and says, it's even more glorious than I ever heard in my own ears. So it gets really confusing in the Bible sometimes with all these different names. Sometimes they are linked, sometimes they aren't. Like there's even another, I think come up later, there'll be another Mephibosheth. Like that's a random name. There's another Mephibosheth in the Bible, let alone all the Josephs, right? Try to keep the Josephs straight, right? Old Testament, New Testament, all over the place. So yeah, that's why it really takes studying the Bible. I say you can read the Bible, that's one thing, but studying the Bible is a whole other thing, because there's a lot of layers to peel back. Good question, though. Any other question or comments anybody has? All right, well, thank you, everybody. Make sure to head read along. Lord willing, we'll be in 2 Samuel 21 next week. But until then, keep reading your Bibles, keep praying, and keep your lamps trimmed and burning.